All right, the time is now 8 o'clock. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the 2022 DelDOT Lessons Learned Workshop. Again, my name is John Cariano, and I'm going to be your host again today for the remainder of the workshop. We'll be handling questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, please click on there and submit your question. If time permits, we will ask the presenter audibly to answer. If not, they will stick around and answer the question through the chat feature. Also, there's closed captioning available at the bottom of your screen again for where it says live transcript. And we are recording this session and it will be posted on the DRC and the YouTube page at a later time. And one last reminder, we will be doing the polling questions throughout the workshop. Again, I will put the poll everywhere link in the chat so you can utilize that to answer the questions as they come up, or you can text DelDOT to 22333. And again, the evaluation form will be sent out today and it's due March 11th. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to DelDOT's Deputy Attorney General George Lee, who will give us some tips on how to stay out of trouble.
Morning, everyone. Some of you have had the opportunity that you have heard me speak at Leadership Academy. I'm one of the 3 Deputy Attorney Generals assigned to DelDOT. My colleagues, Ken Feaster and Brad Evie, each handle different aspects on behalf of the agency. I'm kind of the generalist, and so that I was asked to talk with you a little bit about writing, and probably my most favorite subject is FOIA. And probably the first thing I would start off by discussing as we talk about FOIA is, because this is being recorded and it's going to be published on the website, it's subject to FOIA. So some of the otherwise more colorful comments and things of that nature are probably best preserved and not part of the presentation. Now, okay, it's not letting me go to the next page. There we go. One of the things that as engineers and just anybody involved on behalf of the agency, you may not think about is, what I put in writing, what and how it's phrased, and why is that a concern? And for those of you who work up in Canal or up north, you'll remember that there was a pretty big project going back a number of years ago where a developer was building up some of the old shipyards just south of town. They were putting up some high-rise buildings and so forth. And as is frequently the case, and in fact, some of you here at the agency are involved in the claims process, litigation ensued. And in the litigation, the first thing that the attorneys did was, well, share with us all of your communications and all of your emails involving the project. And why is that a problem? Well, because this is what one of the engineers actually wrote. And this is an excerpt from the email. Not only will you see that it is maybe not the most professional document, and it includes some profanity, although quite frankly, the choice of profanity that was used is not the worst I've ever heard on a job site, but is also not something that looks great when it's put up in front of a jury. And they're talking about the claims process and actually back charges here. And it involved trying to get the masonry contractor to do some work. And there was a fight over who was going to pay for it. And you'll see that the engineer, in some colorful terms, talks about once the crane is up, because they had an overhead tower crane that they were putting up, that basically once the crane was up, they had them at their mercy. And in fact, he said he's on the hook. It gives him incentive to move. Right now, we have no hook. In my career, I've never dealt with someone who is as deceitful as, and we won't mention the gentleman's name, who would want to make me take this type of approach. He's taking advantage. He has us on the hook. And the thing that the court, and you'll see on the next page, finds is that, and I'll jump back for a second, the court didn't really find all that enamoring the language about beating the shit out of him and screwing him in the end and trying to make it back. And you'll see that it was Judge Herlihy that was discussing that language. And he found it not to be a full and faithful spirit of cooperation. And even the judge, who, if you knew Judge Herlihy, was not someone to shy away from much of anything, commented that even in the rough and tumble world of construction, this was kind of a unique situation. So I start my presentation with that discussion because it really leads into why is it important to think about what we put in writing when we send emails, when we do memos. These days, if you have a DelDOT issued phone, when we send text messages, and even more so these days, things like what we post on Facebook, Instagram, or other platforms. Really, anything that you write can be used and can be obtained, and really is something that either via FOIA or in litigation may open up the agency to questions. So the idea being to write letters that are clear, concise, and don't have some of the extraneous fluff that even has the most stalwart of judges getting squeamish. Now, I know in what I do for a lot of the different groups is contract review. And there are form contracts. And in fact, there's even form letters. I know with Don and his group, we've worked out some form cease and desist letters, or at least letters that serve as the format for follow-on documents. But just because it's a form and it's been approved in one instance doesn't mean that it's the right form for every instance. For example, the agreements that the agency uses when it's negotiating with a contractor where, quite frankly, DelDOT is in a superior position and it's good to be the king, so to speak, because you can choose the language, is different than, for example, when the agency is negotiating with the federal government for an easement on the airbase, where the federal government's the king and the agency is compelled to agree to some terms that it may not otherwise want to agree to. Also, I have seen a number of forms where they address the issue of indemnity, things of that nature. Just because it's snuck through once or wasn't caught by an attorney years ago doesn't mean that it's still good or applicable. The legislature routinely sees issues and adjusts the legislation, or the agency amends its regulations. So just because a document was good 15 or 20 years ago doesn't mean it's going to comply with the law today. And in fact, I know that we have worked, legal's worked with some of the different groups on reworking agreements to reflect some of the changes that have occurred. Things to keep in mind as you're writing is to be clear and concise. But if you have to lay a factual background as to why you're making a decision, make sure that the facts are clear and that they're accurate. The worst thing that you can do is have to go back after the fact and kind of do an, oh yeah, we were wrong on that. It happens. But at the same time, if it does happen, you're better to be open and honest about it and say, there was this misunderstanding, but it doesn't change our position, and here's why. Track changes. Anybody who's ever sent an agreement over to legal for review, as opposed to for just approval as the form, knows that whether it's myself, Ken, or Brad, we'll send back things in track changes. The worst thing that you can do is send that track changes out with the attorney's comments, because number one, you're actually waiving attorney-client privilege. Number two, you're sharing with somebody outside the agency our thought process and recommendations. Now, you may not accept the recommendations, but you don't want somebody to use that back against the agency. I will tell you, phrasing versus requesting versus demanding. There are times that you tell a contractor, you will do this. This is what's required in your contract. Or if it's questionable or ambiguous about whether it's required or not, you may request it, and then it may wind up in a change order. or a claim, or it may be something that they are willing to do in the spirit of a good working relationship. The biggest thing I will tell you as your attorney is we're smart people, but we don't know everything, and we don't know some of the phrases that you as engineers use. So the first time you use a phrase, if you're not sure of your audience, define it. I will tell you that the number of times I receive abbreviations and I have to go back and say, I have no idea what you're trying to say. Explain it to me. Think about your audience when you're writing things, because if it's going to somebody at a county council, if it's going to somebody who's not an engineer, is this something that they're going to understand? And where that becomes important is if they don't understand what you're saying, it leads to misinterpretations and misunderstandings. So clarity is key. A lot of times what you will do as engineers, and anybody, quite frankly, is you'll have a phone call with somebody or a meeting with somebody and think you've reached a resolution. And then 6 months later, I never agreed to that, or that's not what we discussed comes up. Well, how do you avoid that? And one of the things that we do is recommend sending an email. Hey, it was great meeting with you yesterday. Just to confirm, this is the problem. This is the solution. This is who's going to be responsible for what. Lay out what was agreed to. And if there's something that still needs to be resolved, it's okay to lay that out as well. It shows that there's an active ongoing dialogue, and it narrows in on what is or isn't agreed to. All of DelDOT's contracts say that any changes have to be confirmed in writing. Well, that email where you're laying out, we met, we discussed, this is what we agreed to as a path forward. Is it a writing signed by both parties? No, but it is something that can help establish what the party's intent was in working towards a resolution, or whether there was an agreement that something would or wouldn't be covered under the contract or be subject to a claim. This is probably, I'm trying to think of how to say this since we're being recorded. So the Freedom of Information Act eats up a significant amount of time in legal. The Freedom of Information Act basically provides that absent certain statutory exemptions, everything the agency does is open to the public for review. That means that whether there's a lawsuit or not, somebody can send an email. And one of my favorites is if there's a dispute with a developer over a project, and it's about entrances or road widening or acquiring right of way, or the corridor capacity preservation program involving Route 1, and things get written in an email, and it's not just an email to the developer or the individual seeking permitting, but internally. Those emails and those discussions are subject to FOIA. So one of the things I always say is, do I want my mom or dad to read this? How is this going to look if the news journal submits a FOIA request and my email gets blown up and put in the news journal? Is this something that's going to make DelDOT look bad? Is this something that violates DelDOT's employee code of conduct? The code of conduct obviously is a disciplinary issue, and that's more of a personal issue, but the talking about, as our friends at Gilbane and BPG were doing, about backcharging the living daylights out of somebody just doesn't look very good or put the agency in a positive light. So we refer to it as don't feed the troll. If there is a heated dispute, or it starts to become something that becomes less than professional, don't rise to the bait. One of the rules that actually was taught to me by an elder lawyer when I was a young lawyer 20 plus years ago was phone calls, faxes, now emails. If it is something that has you where your face is turning red and you really want to maybe say something less than professional or somewhat hurt and abrasive, invoke the 24-hour rule. Give yourself a cooling down period. Think about it. I've found more often than not that if I wait 24 hours, or I hate to say it, there have been times I've had to wait 48 hours before responding, it has resulted in me writing a more professional, more effective email than my initial response of wanting to tell somebody what they can go do with themselves. That's never effective. That doesn't put the agency in a good light. And quite frankly, it starts to inflame the situation, which detracts from accomplishing the mission or completing the project. At times, I've also reached out to, whether it's either Ken or Brad, my colleagues. I actually just submitted a brief yesterday on behalf of DMV in a rather disputed matter to the Superior Court. And I had Jana and Amy, the director and deputy director, review the brief before I filed it. A second set of eyes, just to make sure that you're not becoming engaging in what we refer to as ad hominem or personal attacks, and just conveying the message is always a good way to go. So we talk about FOIA. And here I talk about, did you send it on a work email? Keep in mind, it's not just email. It's now, did you send it on an agency cell phone as a text message, as an instant message? Did you send it through Facebook Messenger? If it went through an agency device, laptop, desktop, phone, did you send it? The answer is yes. Was the lawyer copied? If the answer is yes, it may be protected, it may not. If neither Ken, Brad, nor I or another member of DOJ is copied, yeah, chances are it's not protected. Now, some of you have the pleasure of dealing with legislative questions or legislative issues. One of the good things is that your communications with legislators are privileged under the FOIA statute. That means that DelDOT doesn't have to provide them in response to FOIA. But that doesn't mean that the legislator can't waive it and produce that email either intentionally or unintentionally to a member of the public, to the newspaper, or utilize it during a hearing. So the worst thing that you can do is have that legislator have a email that is less than professional or involves some colloquialisms or maybe non-flattering references to an issue, and have that either wind up being publicly shared, or I think for some, you may think it's actually worse to have it shared with Nicole or Shantae and get an invitation to come up to the South Wing second floor. Obviously, that's not a very pleasant discussion. It's something that I think we all strive to avoid. Ultimately, at the end of the day, just because you said something that's unflattering, or I hate to say, I've seen it in a few instances, just flat out stupid, it doesn't mean that the agency doesn't have to produce it. And in fact, in a recent FOIA request from a developer downstate, some emails had to be produced where unfortunately legal had to let the secretary and deputy secretary know what was going out, and that it may not have been the greatest set of materials being produced outside the agency, but we couldn't protect them under FOIA. And had there been a FOIA petition, quite frankly, the agency would have lost, and it would have been even more negative publicity. So I'm actually moving through pretty quickly. And so with that, I have a number of poll questions about FOIA and writing. And I'll start with the first question. And I think that our friends have got it set up where everybody can actually click on the poll. Well, I think we've kind of spent a few seconds. Everybody's had a chance to review it. I'm actually very happy to see the number of falses because DTI can actually retrieve almost anything that is ever sent through the state email system. One of the things that has been learned over the last 4 or 5 years is that there have been enough litigation holds issued to DTI since the state email system went online that there are emails going back almost to the day that the state system went live. All that needs to be done is a form completed, signed off on by either the secretary or deputy secretary, and DelDOT can run your name, run your email address, and run search terms and find every email that you have sent on a subject. So even if you delete it off your computer, you go in to your sent emails, delete it, your deleted folder, delete it, and go back into the deleted emails file and clear that out. It never truly goes away. Now, one of the things that you will learn is you can send an email in response to something that may be sensitive and say, hey, got time for a call. Phone calls aren't recorded. There's no record of that. So if you need to have a discussion, and whether it be to vent or to try and vet an issue, do it on the phone. Now that everybody's returning to work, it is good to actually walk down the hall and walk in somebody's office and say, hey, let me run this past you. Let me chat with you about this. If that then leads to you doing a confirmatory email, that's great. But otherwise, if you're not sure about something, pick up the phone, walk down the hall. I see a question. Oh. The question is, for an approved plan, design file, could someone FOIA that information and try and use that file's design calculations? All right, so the issues come up a couple times. For example, when you're dealing with the transportation studies, and when it's a draft and the letter hasn't been issued, developer sends in a plan, and then it's being reviewed by the outside consultant, and there's a discussion between DelDOT and the outside consultant, things along those lines. As long as it's still in draft, that is not subject to FOIA. Once it is actually finalized and the letter issued, it has now been published, it is subject to FOIA. So if that letter has calculations or an underlying data set, it's no longer protected. I do know that there have been instances where an outside consultant has requested that their methodology, when they're doing a TIS or traffic impact study, that their methodology be protected. If they have a novel method for doing the traffic impact study, what I have seen is that we have raised the exemption under FOIA of trade secret, and that has worked so far, but quite frankly, it's not a guarantee that somebody's going to be able to protect their underlying calculations and math once it goes into a final letter or final approval. Hopefully that answered the question that was posed. So that'll lead me to the next slide. Oh, jumped too far ahead. A lot of times you'll send an email. Many of you I recognize are in leadership, either at the manager, deputy director, or director level. So you'll have an issue with an employee and you'll be communicating with HR. And the question becomes, when you start providing information to HR about an HR file, an individual or personnel matter, is that exempt from FOIA? And it looks like we're kind of sort of stabilizing. All right, so as to FOIA, it's exempt and it can't be produced. If you send something to HR to put into somebody's personnel file, personnel files and personnel records are specifically exempt under FOIA. So if you send it to them and say, hey, either I'm disciplining this person or this person has been out sick, or you're even doing it for yourself where you're saying, hey, I've been out for more than 2 days. Here's my doctor's note to substantiate my use of sick time. That is not subject to FOIA. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're disciplining an employee, that email won't become relevant if it goes before the MERB, or if they're a union employee, that it won't become relevant to an arbitration proceeding, or if it goes into litigation. But for purposes of FOIA, that document is in fact protected. All right, so conversations through Teams. Well, yes. If you use the Teams chat function, that is in fact subject to FOIA. So if somebody sends a Teams chat and you email back and forth, or you chat back and forth, I guess is probably the better way to describe it. Yes, that can be FOIA. Now, if you use Teams for a meeting and that meeting is not recorded, well, then there's no record of the fact that other than a meeting occurred. There's no actual documentation. It doesn't track what documents were shared on the screen and so forth. So Teams can be useful for a meeting in those instances when you can't walk down the hall. But if you put things into chat or you post things to the group and it stays in the chat screen, that is in fact subject to FOIA. And with that, I'm going to jump to my final question of the day. Looks like we have stabilized. So if you think that you're protected by copying Brad, Ken, or I on every email you send and say, well, it's covered by the attorney-client privilege, it never gets FOIA'd, that is false. Just copying one of the deputies doesn't get it the protections. You have to be actively seeking legal guidance from one of us. For example, hey, George, let me run this past you, or hey, George, can you review this contract and tell me what you think? It could also be a situation where you've had a meeting or a phone call, and then you get a follow-up email saying, these are your legal options, or this is what you may legally do. You may also have an email where you spoke with Ken, Brad, or I, or our predecessors, Annie, or even Fritz, where you say, hey, I talked with Fritz years ago and Fritz told me this. Well, that's protected by attorney-client privilege because you're relating something that was told to you by a lawyer for the agency. That is still work product. It's still covered under the attorney-client privilege. But simply, copying Ken, Brad, or I, or our predecessors, Annie and Fritz, on an email, and then engaging in a discussion that is not related to a legal issue doesn't give the protection. In fact, what has unfortunately happened in a couple instances is we've just simply redacted that the lawyer was copied on the email and then produced the email in response to a FOIA request. So just copying the lawyer doesn't protect it. It's only protected if it's actually seeking, receiving, or discussing legal advice. So the best answer and best practice for all of you is, if you're not willing to let it go outside the agency and let it be seen by your mother, your father, your grandmother, the news journal, any number of legislators, just don't put it in writing and don't say it. Do the legal terms at the end of an email beneficial? All right, so The emails that I send, if you've ever received one from me, include the standard verbiage that we use, which is this is a protected communication from attorney to client, providing legal advice, so forth and so on. We include that because it's a red flag for anybody who receives that email to say, for example, if another lawyer receives it, to say to themselves, wait, before I go any further, is this email in fact inadvertently produced or covered by the attorney-client privilege? All that is a flag, quite frankly. The fact that I include that on an email and then I email asking you about whether you want to go to lunch today and go play golf as opposed to working this afternoon does not make it an attorney-client communication that would be protected. The News Journal can still get that email where you and I are talking about playing golf as opposed to being at work. That's why even with those disclaimers, you still have to really think through what you're putting in writing. Now, with that, as I said, there are several of us here at the agency. Myself, Ken, and Brad are the deputies. And then there are two paralegals, Kristen and Kristen. Many of you have worked with them. They predate my tenure here. They know FOIA like the back of their hand. So if you are not sure about something with FOIA and you can't reach Ken, Brad, or myself, Kristen and Kristen are excellent resources as well and are happy to help you beforehand because it's always easier to fix something when you're out in front of it than trying to clean it up after the fact. And with that, I think I'm at the end of my half hour, unless anybody else has any other questions.
There's none at this time, George, but thank you very much for all that important information. It served as a good reminder for all of us. If you have any more questions, he left his contact information, or you can use the Q&A feature to submit them. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Jim Pappas, Director of Transportation Resiliency and Sustainability, to present on beneficial use materials.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, John. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about beneficial use materials. So this kind of started a few months ago when the question came up about the use of rotomillings and some projects that didn't go so well and didn't go as planned. So there were some discussions that took place, and I just wanted to kind of take a step back and look at the beneficial use of various materials, and then can specifically talk about millings a little bit. So, all right, so there's a little bit of a lag, but so I'm going to talk about what beneficial use is, what the materials are, what are the benefits that we and others have seen from that use of those beneficial materials, and then what are kind of some of the impediments that we have to continuing their use. So how do we overcome those is what we want to talk about. So why do we even think about using beneficial materials? So you'll hear me reference the 3 E's a couple times during this presentation, and those 3 E's are engineering benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits. And you can kind of put that in whatever order that you may like, but those are kind of the 3 pillars of why we potentially want to look at using recycled or beneficial use materials. So the engineering benefits are sometimes it's similar, if not better performance by using recycled materials. The environmental benefits, you know, we're hearing an awful lot about that right now, not having to put materials in landfills, the greenhouse gas reductions, and that's the reduction of both like the extraction, the production, and the transportation. So think of oil, for example. You know, the asphalt that we use to make hot mix asphalt comes from a barrel of oil. Well, if we can use materials or reuse materials and therefore extract less oil out of the ground, that's a beneficial use. So that's saving the finite resources, natural resources that we have on this planet. The economic benefits, I put in there as a question mark, but I think over time in Delaware and across the nation and actually across the world, I think it's been proven that beneficially using these materials have a significant at times economic benefit. And so again, it's not just that we're kind of getting rid of something, because again, they have engineering benefits to them as well. And I'll talk about a couple examples here in the next couple of slides. And then the other one is, you know, just psychological. You know, there was an expression a few years ago, this is not our planet, we're just borrowing it from our children and our grandchildren. So I think, we all want to, make the planet or leave the planet better than it was, when we came in. So that's what we're trying to work towards. Oops, sorry. So what are some of the beneficial use materials that we use? And so some of these are we've used here in Delaware, and some of them, national and international. So recycled asphalt pavement and millings, I think everybody, in design and construction has heard of that. Recycled concrete aggregate, we have used that at times in lieu of GABC and have specifications that previously allowed that. You may or may not know that we use recycled asphalt shingles. If you have asphalt shingles in your house, asphalt shingles are made of, asphalt, aggregates, and fibers. Well, those are pretty good things to be able to use in hot mix asphalt. Tires, we have actually used ground tire as embankment, and we have also used shredded tires in hot mix and warm mix. And again, several states across the country are using that quite often. Fly ash. Fly ash is a byproduct of burning coal. Now, there is obviously a very large move nationally and internationally to get away from burning coal because of the greenhouse gas emissions. But fly ash is a byproduct of that combustion. And we have used fly ash in our concrete. And some of you may or may not know, just south of our administration building, kind of where Roma Restaurant is, as you're heading south on that, as you're going up that ramp, you're riding on fly ash. When SR1 was originally constructed, there's a fly ash core embankment there that was delivered from Delmarva Power down in Sussex County. Ground granulated blast furnace slag, again, that's a byproduct of the manufacturing of steel. So again, this is the whole beneficial use thing is these materials like fly ash and slag, for example, are produced to make other things. And again, instead of just kind of sticking them in a landfill or burying them in the ground, if we in industry can work together to find beneficial uses, then that's just a wonderful thing. And then other things, glass, foundry sound, and plastics have been used, again, nationally and internationally. And the markets are just continuing to develop. There is just so much research that is ongoing, again, across the world on reusing materials for a beneficial use. So, kind of the materials that we're using today, we'll continue to look at using them in the future as well. So what are some of the concerns of using any of those beneficial materials? So the applicability, what is going to be the service life? If we're going to kind of put something in a bridge, a road, a pavement, or something like that, what's going to be the long-term life? So obviously research has to take place. Health concerns, is there toxicity? So I mentioned about the fly ash that was used in the embankment down on Route 1. Well, there were monitoring wells that were set up, and like I mentioned, the fly ash is actually the core. Around it is conventional borrow material, so it's kind of isolated, so to speak. We'll talk a little bit about the wrap. Again, one of the concerns, and again, this was a situation here in Delaware where wrap was used on a couple of projects and it didn't perform the way we expected it. And what I want to kind of stress through this presentation is that's more of an application than the materials. And why I say that is, again, if you ride on Route 1 and parts of the early roads that were built in kind of relationship to the Route 1 project here between Dover and Smyrna, you've been riding on millings for 20, 25 years, however long SR1's been open. Again, I think the right application, we got great performance out of that. Recycled concrete aggregate, again, the reuse of that, I know over time, I have always recommended whenever you have a wet area, so say you're doing pavement or some type of an excavation work, and you need to do like an undercut or something like that, man, recycled concrete aggregate is the greatest material you can use, because if you've ever seen recycled concrete aggregate or even held it in your hand, that powder that's left in your hand is cement powder. And when you put cement and water together, it creates a really good durable material. So I have always recommended to reuse that recycled concrete aggregate, again, especially in wet areas. It's a great use for that material. Other concerns is just the handling of it. It's just like any other material, though. Keep in mind, that most of the materials that we use are not necessarily natural. They're processed in some way. And inevitably, when materials are processed, there are going to be concerns. You know, if you think about recycled materials versus virgin materials, those in the construction field, I got to believe sometime over your career, virgin aggregate that came from a quarry didn't meet the specification at some point in time in your career. Well, recycled materials are going to kind of be the same thing. So again, don't just throw it out because it's a recycled material. We have these same challenges with conventional materials as well. And then the regulatory side of things, again, when we want to ever use some of these recycled materials here in Delaware, we need to touch base with DENREC and make sure that they're on board with the use of those materials. So just some more concerns. Cost. Again, sometimes these materials are going to cost more, or if not the same price. I know, for example, like slag cement that we use to mitigate the ASR in concrete. Years and years ago, the suppliers were just trying to get rid of it. It was like, you know, 20 bucks a ton. Well, then they realized that they had a good material and they capitalized on it, and, you know, it went up to 100 bucks a ton. So, you know, for good or bad, that's capitalism at its finest. But sometimes those recycled materials or beneficial use materials may actually be higher. And then we're just going to have to determine, you know, from a life cycle cost, is it worth it? Do we get the benefit versus the cost that we're going to pay? Unfamiliarity of the materials. Again, you know, hopefully, you know, sessions like this and others that you may attend, you become familiar with some of these materials and again, some of their uses and benefits. Variability and availability. Again, some of these materials are not widely available. I give you a quick example. So fly ash, I mentioned again, byproduct of the burning of coal. Well, again, there's a big move nationally and internationally to no longer produce energy by burning coal. Well, there are parts of the US, mostly like in Texas and kind of the Midwest, where they rely heavily on fly ash in their concrete to mitigate the ASR, the alkali silica reactivity. Well, they are shutting down those coal burning power plants, and they are actually, one, they're looking beyond just kind of their local area to get this fly ash, but they're actually extracting old fly ash that's been buried over time to reuse it. So a lot of power plants over time, when they were producing energy out of coal and they had all this fly ash, they bury it in the ground legally. I mean, they legally buried it. They're now actually going in and extracting that because, again, it's a beneficial use. So again, different parts of the country have different you know, situations. Lack of standards and specifications. Again, as I mentioned earlier, as these more and more materials are coming on board, you know, through research, sometimes there aren't standards. And the other thing is we have to keep in mind is with a lot of these materials, we don't have 20 years of experience. You know, that's why these are new. And just because they're new doesn't mean that they won't work. So we need to keep an open mind. And then champion technical support. Again, most of the time, if an industry or supplier comes out with a new material, they've done the research and they're going to be there to provide, hopefully, the technical support that may be needed. So again, the 3 E's with the benefits, again, engineering benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits. Hopefully this is the, you know, like the 3-legged stool that the 3 of those things can kind of come together and, you know, show benefits for each one of those. So what does the future look like for beneficial use materials? So the first one there I put was political pressure. So EPD stands for Environmental Product Declarations, or EPDs. So, you know, like when you go to the grocery store and you buy like a box of cereal, for example, and you look on the side and it's got all the nutritional information or how bad it is for you, depending on how you read it. They are actually creating those for materials right now. And in California, it is legislatively required that manufacturers supply these environmental product declarations. So these EPDs go into great detail, but basically it's the DNA of the material that gets used, and they reference the greenhouse. A lot of it references back to the greenhouse gas emissions associated with this material. And again, it's what's called from cradle to grave. It talks about how it's extracted out of the ground to ultimately where it's going to be used. So don't think there's a great push for that here in little old state of Delaware, but you know, For good or bad, California is doing that. Minnesota legislators are looking at that, and I believe Colorado is as well. So this is not something that's going to happen, today, tomorrow, or next week, but at some point in time, this may be something that comes along. In Europe and other parts of the world, they've been doing this for years. So it's just something that may be coming. Is it a DOT priority? Again, I think if we can show those 3 E's, the environmental, economic, and engineering benefits, I think that we can certainly make it a priority. You may have heard of like LEED and other green processes that are out there now to kind of capture that. It's not really a big push necessarily in horizontal construction, but in vertical construction, in the building trades, getting LEED certified is a really big deal. So they really push to, do things, try and make the buildings as carbon neutral as they possibly can. And with everything else, it's a risk reward of using these materials. What risks are there, and what does, in our case, what does the DOT get out of it? And, that's going to be a case by case situation. Public relations and marketing, again, this kind of goes back to the psychological idea of recycling materials to, again, hopefully make the planet better off when we leave than when we got here. And documented performance and costs, obviously that's really important to even start the thought of possibly using these materials. So what are some of the impediments to implementation? So misconceptions. Again, over the years, I can say personally this was nationally. People just think that if you're using a recycled material, it's an inferior material. And myself and many others that were involved in recycling with FHWA and some private industry folks were like, no, that's not the case. We can show benefits of using these materials. And again, it goes back to the 3-legged stool. Again, bad past experiences. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because something went bad on a project or a location, think about it this way. Well, I'll tell you a quick story. So most folks probably here have only known the super pave hot mix system, right? That's how we do our paving. So super pave is the design methodology. Well, before that was a system called the Marshall method, and that was around when I started way back when. Super pave was kind of just coming on. Well, when super pave kind of rolled out in the mid 90s, late 90s, we had some challenges. We had some compaction issues on job sites. We had some smoothness issues. We had some cracking. We had some bonding issues. And we had some folks within the department that are like, well, see, super pave is bad. Let's go back to the old way. What I had to tell them was when I first started with the department and we were using the Marshall system, we had those exact same problems. We had challenges with compaction. We had challenges with rideability. So it's not necessarily, or it's not the technology. A lot of it's how it's handled and how it's applied. So again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. What are the regulatory challenges? Again, that's not necessarily anything that DelDOT controls, but working with the appropriate regulatory agencies in using these materials. I know, over time when we've wanted to do something, we would reach out to the appropriate folks at DENREC. Sometimes they knew about it, sometimes they didn't. We would educate them. And again, we had some very successful projects. And, at the end of the day is what's the department and the contractor willing to do? Again, this goes back to the previous slide about what are the risk rewards associated with it. Again, it's going to kind of be a case by case example of those. And I think that was it. So I appreciate the time. Some more Northeast states are using cold mixes, including 100% wrap to decrease environmental pollutants. Is DelDOT pursuing this option? So that's a good question. So I know pavement management has in the past used a couple in-place recycling processes, cold in-place recycling, or you can do hot in-place recycling, where that's basically a general process of you keep the existing pavement in place and you come in with basically like a big rototiller is the best way I can explain it. You put either cement or asphalt down and you come in and you mix it all together and you basically get a stabilized base, and then you can put, hot mix or maybe a thin lift of concrete on top of that. So there's a big move afoot nationally to continue to use that because, again, you are saving not only from the environmental standpoint of trucks coming in and out, but you're keeping the material right in place and being able to reuse it. So Yes, it's something that we have used in the past. I've seen it on a few projects going forward. Again, it's not applicable for all locations. So again, it goes back to kind of the individual scope of the project. And I think that was the only question that I saw, John.
Yeah, that was all the questions, Jim. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Jim. I think most of you have his email, so thanks, Jim. Billy Sweeney, DelDOT Project Controls Coordinator, and Craig Blowers, DelDOT Construction Resource Engineer, will provide some training and an update on the e-ticketing efforts that the department has been working on.
Thank you. So we should be starting off here with a few polls on what electronic ticketing is. And oh, there we go. Sorry, advanced one slide too far. So it seems I skipped over the first slide that had a question of whether or not we know what e-ticketing is, but here we have a trial. Have you participated in e-tickets? Just give everybody a minute. So we have a few, but most people haven't participated in e-ticketing yet. So going through this, you'll see a lot of new information. A bit of a lag here. Going to the next slide. There we go. All right, so some of the topics we're going to discuss today, our background, what are our goals, who's on board, and going through everything. Have a lot to cover, so I'm going to move on. So why are we doing this? Why are we doing e-ticketing? These images should be very familiar to anybody in construction. We have boxes and boxes and drawers full of tickets. So one of the reasons is to eliminate that paper use and storage space. It's a lot of stuff to go through and handle. So we want to try and avoid that. Another reason we're doing this is because our contractor and supplier partners are moving in this direction. We need to be part of this conversation and make sure our needs and wants are addressed with e-tickets. So we need to be pushing forward with this as well. So it's not just the contractors and suppliers that are making the decisions. COVID-19 has also weighed in on this. A lot of the e-ticketing stuff started heavily in 2020 with COVID. Concerns about surface transmission on the tickets and whatnot, which I think we've determined isn't as much of a concern now, but it certainly was at the start, and we've just kind of continued on with those efforts. And the big reason I would say is because our friendly federal overlords would like us to look at e-ticketing. It's part of Everyday Count 6. E-ticketing and digital as-built both are part of that initiative. We are working on both of those, but e-ticketing has progressed a little bit further than everything else. So we're discussing that. So what are e-tickets? We have a lovely FHWA definition here. It's accurate, but somewhat verbose. I have a simpler definition below. It's an electronic copy of a paper ticket. Now, if you look online, some people insist that's not what it is. And they're right. It's not just an electronic copy of that paper ticket. It's a dynamic copy of that paper ticket. What you write on a ticket today in the field when you receive it from the contractor, whether you put down last load or 5 tons waste or whatever, that copy is the only copy that's available to everybody. So the contractor may not know that you put down 5 tons waste on that ticket, but with e-ticketing, you will actually have that documentation available to everybody that has the application. So the supplier, the contractor, the inspector, and the office staff will all have that same information. So some of our goals with this, those boxes and files that I mentioned before, we're trying to do away with that. The contractor system, their loadout system, the supplier system, I should say, they generate those tickets in electronic format, printed out on a printer, handed off to us, and then we're turning around and we're scanning that in to Unifier and creating a whole bunch of extra work for ourselves. In addition to retaining the documents, we're dealing with just the hours of scanning that type of stuff in. So by going with e-tickets, we're going to avoid having to do that. Another goal is better documentation. So if you look on the left side of the screen here, that's a very actually decent looking version of a paper ticket. Towards the center of the screen, you might be able to make out net there. That net column is almost gone. You can certainly figure out the information on that ticket if you go ahead and do the calculation, but this is a good ticket, like I said. You can see them covered in tack. You can see them all wrinkled up. Sometimes they run through people's dryers and whatnot, and they're just destroyed. So that version of the ticket is going to turn into this PDF version, and it's going to look like that throughout the life of that ticket from day 1 to day 1000. It's always going to look like that, and it really kind of cleans up our need to do forensic investigation on a ticket that we have. It will also improve our audit trail. On the left side here, we have a view of our app and what the audit log looks like there. It's building out, unfortunately, but the intent is when we mark a ticket delivered, and if somebody comes behind them and marks it rejected or adds a note, you will be able to tell who did all those changes and modifications on there. If you look on the right side, you see a typical ticket, and we'll be able to tell now when that ticket was delivered and who approved it and when, and whether or not they were doing it 2 months later while they built a PowerPoint, or if they did it some other point in the project. The big goal in my mind is eliminating our lovely ticket tapes. We have to go ahead and punch in and into an adding machine every single load that we get and add it all up. This obviously is a chance for error. We transpose numbers. Sometimes we catch it at the end of the tape and have to redo it all. Sometimes we don't catch it until a blue checker or red checker or audit runs through. So by eliminating the need to do ticket tapes, we're going to eliminate the chance for transposing numbers. And that's not to say that we don't still need to double check those electronic documents, but my point is we're going to eliminate our own error that we introduce into the system. There are some challenges going with e-tickets, internet access being the biggest one. We don't have 100% wireless coverage in the state, but we do have a workaround. It does require that contractors still get paper tickets, but we won't be retaining those tickets. So if you're in an area with low access, you go ahead and take a look at the ticket from the truck driver, punch in the last 4 digits, and then once you have access, it'll sync back up. And I think Billy's going to be discussing this a little bit more later. So another challenge that we're going to have is we're going to be eliminating the stamp that's on all hot mix tickets. That's going away. We won't be in a situation where that plant inspector will have a chance to stamp every single ticket. They will still have access to every single ticket should they want it, and they can go ahead and put notes on it, whatever they like, but the stamp will no longer be part of our process with e-tickets. I mentioned it earlier, junk in, junk out. We can't automatically trust the electronic data we're getting from the contractor and the supplier. You can see here the max GVW on that ticket was 71,000 pounds per our specification in Delaware code. Actually, you can't have a max GVW of 71,000 pounds. It's 70,000 pounds or 73,280. So we still need to review those tickets. If we see an error, the contractor can go ahead and void that ticket out, issue a new one, or we can reject it. If we're seeing a bunch of error, then we need to have a conversation about getting those errors corrected before we start continuing to place material. What information do we want? You see here, these are 2 applications that are showing a lot of GPS tracking data. And that was the initial push with a lot of electronic ticketing. Iowa was big on this. And one of our initial discussions about it involved this as well, but it turns out that that GPS data is not something we want to get involved in. It's very pricey to have all that stuff set up. And then you start dealing with independent truckers and making sure that they have the right GPS system to work with this plant and so on and so forth. And it just got to be hairy. So we don't care about that. That's the contractor's data. We don't care about what their fleets are doing. We just care that we have the information we currently have on the paper ticket that's dynamic. We also want to make sure we're requesting similar information from other states. This is a nationwide initiative. So there is an AASHTO draft specification on e-tickets. Our special provision is based upon that AASHTO guide spec. And the AASHTO spec actually expands out to 40 items and has various fields that are required for asphalt, concrete, and aggregate. Right now, ours is only set up for asphalt. We are expanding to concrete, and we'll be looking to go to aggregate and perhaps more in the future. But right now, we're just looking at aggregate, and our specification will expand as we expand our scope. So we want some uniformity in the information we're collecting. There's a whole bunch of different ticketing applications from a variety of companies, and they all work fine. There's nothing wrong with them. The biggest problem we have with it is we don't want our inspection staff to have 3, 4, 5, 10 different apps to go ahead and mark each load delivered. We just want one. So we went with a sole source, and it is Haul Hub. And Haul Hub, the reason we went with them is because they came up with this idea of a portal that others have now started to follow on with them. But this portal gives them, gives us, I should say, the ability to get all the information no matter what system the contractor is using. This is a little snippet from the PDFs that we shared with the suppliers. So whether they had internal resources, an existing e-ticketing solution, or even if they have no resource and they're running Windows Server 2003, we have a way for them to tie in. And we tried to make it as low burden as possible for them to get into our system. And so we can get that information. So who's in? This is a list of everybody's in that is in the system, save one, but they are in the system. They kind of came in a little bit after I finished the PDF. It would be contractor materials. So all of our hot mix providers are in the system at this point. There's nobody that isn't. And if we have a new provider coming into the state that wants to produce asphalt, they're going to have to get into the system as well. How you access the e-tickets, there's a website that you can go to. There's a nice long fancy website, but we kind of slimmed it down. Billy had the idea of tickets.deldot.gov, easy website to remember for everybody. When you type that into your address bar, this is the webpage that'll pop up. You can also access it through a mobile application called DotSlip. There is an iOS and Android version of these, and I don't expect anybody to write this down. You can just go ahead and email me for the link to those spots in the App Store if you are interested in downloading right away. Just a note, the initial view when you download, it will look like that purple view right there in the middle with the DS icon, .slip name. Once you change the themes, once you log in, you can change the theme to a DelDOT theme, and we'll get a lovely blue and orange that we love with a DelDOT logo. Both versions function the same, it's just an appearance, so you can use either version. One other thing to note is the apps are updated on a regular basis. iOS tends to be updated first and Android following behind about a week later. For user credentials, make sure your area engineer is reaching out and contacting either myself or Billy before the start of the project. Our contact information is there. Just so everybody knows, the contractor isn't going to be accessing .slip. They will access the information through a separate application called JobSlip, and they'll need to reach out to their suppliers for that access information. That will be through the suppliers, not through us. Now, Billy's going to go ahead and give a general overview of the mobile application. And Billy, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Go ahead and click through. I think you're going to retain control, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, like Craig said, the app is available through either the Android or the iOS App Store. You just got to do a search for .slip, and then it'll pop up. Like you mentioned, you won't see that nice DelDOT symbol on the icon. You'll see the Haul Hub. I might say Haul Hub on it, and that DS icon in it. Go ahead and step through. And like Craig said, they generally are the same. There is a few small things that are different just because Android either lets you do some things that iOS doesn't, or vice versa. But generally, they're the same. We have seen a week, maybe 2 weeks lag, where iOS is typically a little bit earlier. So your typical process, so the normal thing, the normal process that an inspector will go through, you're going to log into the system with the credentials that you're provided. That's using either your email address or your phone number, depending on how what's provided. You're going to find your ticket, and there's a couple different ways to see that, and you'll see this in a video in a second here. And then you're going to enter any notes about that ticket if you feel like you have to, or if you're required to, and then you're going to mark that ticket as delivered. It's literally really like 15 seconds to do. This video is a little bit longer because I had to slow it down because I'm going to try and talk over top of of the video as much as I can. Go ahead and start it, Craig. So from your app, you can see here on your home screen, you see the dot slip icon there, has the DelDOT symbol. Again, yours may not start with that initially. It'll probably have that purple icon with the DS on it. I've already changed my theme, so you're seeing what the DelDOT theme actually looks like. Again, phone number or email address is typically used here, and that's stuff that you'll be provided by an administrator. When you first log in, you're going to see a list of any tickets that are provided for projects that you're assigned to. By tapping on that area, the first screen is the delivery reports. This is just a list of trucks that have showed up for that day. And as you look through, you can swipe to the left, and you'll begin to see the types of materials that were delivered that day, and then also just an overview of the ticket information based on the status. So you can see there that information. We'll go through that a little more in a minute. The other way you can get to your tickets is by clicking on the My Projects in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And this is going to show you any projects that you are assigned to. Once you're at this screen, you select the project. First screen that comes up is the material types that were delivered for that project as a whole, from the beginning when the first ticket came through until the last ticket. Swiping to the left, you get to see kind of an overview now of the different statuses. So whether you've marked tickets delivered or rejected, any waste, any tickets that are waiting for you to mark. Scrolling down, you'll see tickets by day, where you can select any day that you want. And then you come to this screen again. You've seen this just a second ago. First screen shows you that material type. Now this is just for that specific day. Swiping to the left, and then you'll begin to see that overview again that's marked by status. Now, with one difference is on iOS, this status or this overview is based on the little chip that you have selected there at the bottom or in the middle of the screen where it says pending and delivered and rejected. So right now we're only seeing tickets that are pending. As I turn on the other chips there, and then I scroll back to the left, now you'll start to see for that day all of the totals based on the status. To open a ticket, you scroll down. Oh, we're gonna turn off and just look at pending tickets again. So you scroll down here, and then you just tap on one of the tickets. Do not tap on the mark delivered unless you're ready to mark it's delivered. We recommend going into the ticket like you're shown here. At this point, this is where you get to see the kind of the raw ticket data. So you'll tap on that area that says raw ticket data. You'll see there's a lot of information here. I could go through all this and spend quite a bit of time, but you'll see it once you get into it the first time. From here, before marking delivered, we recommend going into the inspector review area. And if you took a temperature on a load, you'll tap the edit inspector notes button there, or button there you see. And this is where you'll enter your notes. So you'll type in the temperature if you took a temperature on that load, the station that load began dumping at, if you know that information, or if you're standing there while that's being loaded. If there were any waste on that particular load for any reason, say last load of the day, and you just didn't use the whole load, and then any notes about that particular load or about this particular ticket that you think are important to note. Once you type in that information, you type the blue update button. It'll update the ticket. If we tap on the inspector review section again, you'll see that it hasn't been marked delivered yet, but you can now see that filled temperature is filled out. You can see the station and waste are all filled out in your notes. Once you're ready to mark the ticket as delivered, you tap the mark delivered in the top bottom left-hand corner, and you've marked the ticket as delivered. Now you can see that it was signed by me with my electronic signature that is stored in the app, and the additional information. All right, Craig, go ahead and go to the next slide. That's the end of that one. So the next process that we're going to go over is rejecting a load. So in this particular case, you're going to, again, find the ticket, you're going to enter notes, you're going to mark it as rejected. I don't go through the whole beginning of it like I did there a minute ago. So we're going to start, go ahead and start it, Craig. We're going to start at selecting a ticket that has not been marked delivered yet. We can review the raw ticket data again if you want. Instead, in this case, we're just going to go right into the inspector's notes. Again, I'm going to enter some notes. Again, I'm going to say that I took a temperature in the field again on this one. It came in a little bit colder than we'd like to see. Because we didn't place it, obviously, we're not going to put any stationing information. And this part, I'm just going to use some notes or place some notes about that load maybe why it was going to be marked rejected, or why we felt it came in a little bit colder than we were expecting. So now you tap more actions in the bottom right hand corner. You tap reject, and now you're going to enter a reason for it, for this ticket being, or this load being rejected. And now you can see that area is rejected. You can see that I've signed it again, the date and time that I signed it, and then the reason for rejection is right there on the ticket. Easy for you to see. All right, next slide. Lastly is, what happens when you don't have any connectivity, and how do you know whether you have connectivity or not? So Craig had mentioned this a little bit. Drivers will continue to have to carry paper tickets. We're not saying that just because we're going paperless or we're going e-ticketing that paper tickets won't ever exist again. Obviously, they're always a good backup. I believe there are some state laws in place for transporting materials over the road where drivers have to have some sort of a record of what they have on the vehicle or on the truck. So the paper tickets still be available if need be. The very minimum that you need to get in an event that you don't have connectivity is the last 4 digits in the ticket number from the driver's copy. You can either walk up to the truck and look at the number and try to remember it, or you can take a picture of it with your phone so that you can get away from the truck. Obviously, part of this e-ticketing thing is trying to keep inspectors from having to walk up to the side of a truck, staying away from active travel lanes, that kind of thing. So we don't want you hanging around the truck any more than you absolutely have to. Obviously, you should probably take a general look at the ticket. You don't get to see any details like I've shown in the previous videos. So obviously, just taking a look at that ticket to make sure that the truck is supposed to be on site, it's the right material, that kind of stuff. That is obviously important. But there is not a need to keep a copy of that paper ticket. At this point, you're just trying to get the last 4 digits of that ticket number. Go ahead and start the video, Craig. So you can see in the top left-hand corner there's a red cloud with a line through it that's identifying that there is no connectivity. If you tapped on My Projects, it gives you that error. When you click on that icon in the middle, make sure you, when you come to the screen, make sure you've picked the correct project. That's very important. You type in the last 4 digits of the ticket that you have. You select the status that you're going to pick. Again, entering a field temperature if need be, station for where that where that truck is going to begin unloading the load. Is there any waste? If there is, you type it here, and then again, if there's any notes about that particular ticket. Once you type in, or once you tap the log ticket, that ticket is now logged in the system. And then the next time that you make connection to the internet, whether that's your mobile app service comes back, or whether you go to McDonald's for lunch, and you connect into their free Wi-Fi, the Haul Hub app will automatically recognize that you've got connection again, and it will sync that ticket. So if you chose that ticket needed to be marked as delivered, it will mark that ticket for delivery, or mark it delivered for you automatically, and then it will also enter any notes that you have in there. At this moment, there isn't a way to see any tickets that you've marked or that you've logged offline. That's something that we've talked with Haul Hub about. We think it's important, obviously, to have some sort of screen somewhere so you can see that, hey, I've marked 17 tickets, and which ones synced and which ones did not. Obviously, very easy to, fat finger a number, or very easy to not be able to see a ticket number potentially, and it's important to see, which ones synced and which ones did not. One thing I did not go over is, say you accidentally marked a ticket for delivered, but it was the wrong ticket, or you did this process for the no connectivity, and you typed in the wrong number, and when you go back and look, you go, oh no, that was the wrong one. How do I fix that? You can go back and change the status of a ticket. Like I didn't go over it, but it's very similar to what you already saw. Just changing it from delivered back to pending, and then from pending to rejected, or from rejected to pending, and then pending back to delivered again. So I didn't really go over that process, but it's relatively simple. And obviously, this isn't considered your training. There's going to be plenty of videos out there on our construction manual wiki to kind of go through the process of exactly what to do. We'll make sure that we give plenty of information for when all that's going to happen. Greg, I think that was the end of mine, right?
All right. I went ahead and did some videos on the web interface so you can compare the production value between Billy and myself if you want. But just want to note that this interface is what it's going to look like for construction. M&R is going to have a different view for their web interface because they're going to be focused on plant-based information. We are focused on project-based information. So here's the web page, and log in and proceed through. This is what it looks like. You have your projects load up. You can sort various different ways. If you go back underneath, you can see your project staff and the status of the project. You can assign, area engineers, this is, can assign different staff to the project using that screen there. You can hit view project there. If you scroll down, you'll see other projects as well. So if you go ahead and click view project, this is your landing page, a summary screen, much like you saw in the application. So the ticket information itself, again, very much like what you saw in the app. If you look at the screen, these are all the tickets that you see underneath that summary page above. So you go ahead and click on a ticket. You can mark it delivered in the web interface, just like you can on the application. Confirm it, and then you can also put your notes down below, again, just like you can in the app. And there is also the possibility for the plant inspector to put the plant temperature in there. Any notes the plant inspector may have, they can go ahead and put in notes down below. So that's where you'd see the information coming from the plant, and then you would have that information in the field once they entered it in. Just if you are the plant inspector, please don't mark a ticket as delivered. Perhaps rejected, but certainly not delivered. And as I go ahead and slowly type in here my version of the video. So you go ahead and click update, and then that is now on the screen there. So that's what is on the ticket. If I go ahead and close that out and click on another ticket, I can go ahead and mark that rejected. Again, you have to have a reason for rejection, just like Billy showed. Not testing my patience, just test. One other note here, ticket and photos are live. Audit log, test results, and map are still being built out, but this is where you'd see that information. And that's just kind of indicative of how Hall Hub's been running. They keep on building out more and more things for us to use. How to access. So if you actually want to download the ticket, you go ahead and click on these check boxes to the left side of the screen, scroll to the top, and click download slips. You'll have three options: PDF, CSV, which is an Excel file, and CSV and PDF. You can download it or email it. Click download, it will download as a zip. Save that file, and I'm just going to show everybody what it looks like when you open it up. So if you open up the PDF, and I apologize for how messy my screen was here, but if you minimize that out and scroll down, you'll see all the information that I entered in there: rejected, test. You can also go to the next screen and you'll see the other ticket I downloaded. And I'll have your station, your waste, any notes. So that's what the PDF will look like from the application. And if you close that out and want to look at the CSV file, this is not very much information. I did that on purpose. This does not have all the information that Hall Hub has for us. So close this out and show you what all the information looks like. Go ahead and click download slips again. CSV, make sure you click add all fields in the CSV report, then download. And if you open that up, once it's finished downloading, you'll see all the fields. Now, obviously there's some blanks here because this was a test, but you can see field temp right there in the middle, 222. That's something that I entered. If you scroll over to the right, you'll see the notes for the last load. You'll see rejected, reason for rejections, station number, etc. So all that information is in there. And this is where we can go ahead and essentially run our ticket tape for that load, for all the loads that were delivered during the day. without having to transpose any numbers. We'll just have to do a simple formula, equals sum, and then select your column or cells, and you have your calculation without ever having to type a single number into an adding machine. So that's I think the real benefit of this, and it will save us a lot of transpose numbers and a lot of time doing those ticket tapes. There are some potential issues with e-ticketing. First being the e-tickets not appearing. That's obviously a major concern. We did think about that. We want to make sure we're doing the test. This is a snip from the special provision for e-tickets. We're going to do test loads and calibration tickets essentially at the start of the project, 14 days before we're shipping material, to make sure that we are getting the information. Now, I understand there's going to be circumstances where you add a supplier at the last minute. This is more intended for mainline paving type situations, not like last minute before the plants close. We want to make sure we're getting the calibration in as many circumstances as possible, so we're not missing those tickets. If you're in the middle of paving and the tickets were working and all of a sudden they stop working, Haul Hub's building out a report function that'll flag the project, and we can go ahead and look into it on the back end, see if there's an issue on our sides. Like I mentioned before, incorrect information on the tickets obviously a concern. If you have the wrong carrier or wrong material or something like that, reject the ticket. They can regenerate those tickets without issue. There's voided tickets in the system right now where a supplier has actually voided out and reissued the ticket. Another issue is incorrect information on our .slip application. So the paper ticket shows something like, say, the Waymaster, and our e-ticket doesn't, or the paper ticket shows tons and pounds, but the e-ticket doesn't. So that's something that we can address. It's a link on our side. Each supplier is sending the information in slightly different format or slightly different category, I should say, to us. So it's Haul Hub that has to go ahead and link those two together. And that's just something that we need to be aware of so we can fix. So please reach out to Billy or myself right away and we can get that fixed. The big issue I see in this is marking the tickets as delivered in the field when it's actually dumped. We can't go ahead and let the contractor grab a stack of paper tickets and put it on the paver and then collect it at the end of the day. We need to be standing by the paver and marking stuff delivered. So everyone will need smartphones. I think all of our in-house staff has them by now. If not, they will be getting them shortly. Anybody that might need a portable phone charger, we will get you phone chargers. We're going to work to increase staffing on projects as much as possible. It's not going to be possible on every project, but we're going to do the best we can. We need to make sure we're marking them delivered through the day. If somebody needs a break, we need to rotate out that inspector by the paver. We need to be there by the paver though. The long range plan too is for GPS to be enabled on these apps so we can actually track where that material is dumped. We don't want to track that the material has been dumped 2 months later in somebody's cube as they build a PowerPoint. We want to track it when it's in the field. So just keep that in mind. We want to actually be able to track that type of stuff. Another issue is without the stamps, we need to make sure we're having good communication between the plant inspector and the field inspector. Jen mentioned this yesterday. That's really essential. So when you do your release, make sure both of you have each other's contact information. So if there's any issues, you can make each other aware throughout the day. If we happen to have a catastrophic failure, a solar flare knocks out all the internet or hacking or who knows what, we will still have paper tickets. We're not going to be in a circumstance where we're going to stop paving in the middle of 95 and have a hole there because the internet went down. We'll still have paper tickets. It's our ultimate fail safe just in case something goes wrong. We're not at the point where we're going to delete those paper tickets just yet, like Billy mentioned. So our proposed method of payment. What we're planning on is for the tickets to be marked delivered in Haul Hub. Those will then be uploaded to Unifier throughout the day. And then at the end of the day, the inspection staff is going to select those delivered tickets, identify if they're source or pay, identify the item number they're associated with, and package those tickets together for them to be added to the IDR, hopefully without having to run any tapes, all calculations being automatic. We're still building that out. We had hoped to have it done by March, but we had some staffing issues, so it's kind of pushed to April. But we're looking to have that done very soon. In the interim, right now we'll be marking tickets as delivered in Haul Hub and then download this PDFs like I showed, attach that to the IDR. You can use the Excel CSV file to generate your ticket tapes and attach that to the IDR. And if anybody needs help with that, by all means, please reach out. I think Hall Hub's actually looking to make that an easier process as well, beyond manipulating that Excel CSV file. What projects will e-ticketing be associated with? Starting out, only the ones with the e-ticketing special provision. It's 4015. I'm not sure the last 2 digits. I defer to what Danny actually put it in as. I didn't actually hunt them down to verify that beforehand, so I apologize for that. But only tickets with the e-ticketing special provision. That said, start talking to your contractors about it now. Once we get that Unifier BP live, I would strongly encourage everybody to look to add that special provision. There's no cost to the contractor. It doesn't cost them any more money. We dealt with the suppliers directly. They're all tied in. The information's there in the system. It's just whether or not we want to have the hassle of still dealing with paper tickets. And apologies for the typo there. It should be many of the suppliers may request it. It eliminates the need for them to stamp the tickets, and it focuses them on the use of their own technologies. So they have remote printers set up at the plants to avoid some of the steps and work that they have to do. Some of the future updates and benefits, we're looking to add a dark mode. We are going to have some data analysis for where the GPS, for where the load is placed. 2 other things, I think these are really neat. They're already available to the contractor, and it's another reason I think they're going to push to do it themselves. We're looking to add it to our version of the app, but it's a time to finish estimator and then a payment round check. So if I go to the next screen, you'll see here, this is that time to finish estimator. And if you look at the screen, you'll see you have a target load of 800 tons that day. You've already placed 262 tons. And if you compare the two, the screen in the middle is where you have 10 trucks on the operation for the day. The screen to the right is where you have 8 trucks on the operation for the day. You can see the difference in time between the projected last load is 53 minutes there. Now, that's obviously beneficial to the contractor to let them figure out their production, but it's also beneficial to us. It gives us an idea of when we might be able to wrap up the operation, where we might be for our overall productivity for the day. So it's a great benefit when it comes to that type of stuff. You can guesstimate when you're going to be done, how long it'll take the pavement to cool, and when you might actually be able to pick up the pattern. Another screen here shows a pavement round check. So if you look in the middle screen there, that's a plot out of when a load is actually shipped for lap 1, and then it progresses on lap 2, lap 3, lap 4. If a contractor has too many trucks on or too few, you'll see that graph start looking really funny. If they start running into traffic or something like that, or there's a breakdown, that's when you really start being able to actually plot out all these issues. And if you look on the right there, you see left on table. So the contractor is able to see how many more trucks they actually have to ship to go ahead and make the production that they wanted. But these types of things are the reason I believe the contractor is really going to push for it, because these are the powerful things that we can do with the data. And it's not GPS based. It's just based on the ticket data we already have. It's just analyzing that in a new way with just live analytics, essentially. So I don't have time to go through this video. This was a video that Hall Hub presented at the Mid-Atlantic QAW, but this will certainly be in my presentation, and presentation is going to go up on the DRC, I understand. So I encourage anybody to go ahead and take a look at the video. It's 8 minutes long. It's a good little video on the benefits of e-ticketing. And skipping on. And that concludes my presentation. I have time for questions, I think, just a few minutes.
Thank you, Craig and Billy. There's no open questions at this time. I know Billy had answered the one question already through the chat feature. So, but thank you very much. Any other questions, you can feel free to reach out to Craig and Billy or leave something in the chat until the next presenter starts here. All right. So next we have a tandem to present on some missed opportunities. Mark Lutz, the DOT's Deputy Director of Design, and Don Weber, the DOT's Deputy Director of Operations, are here to present on a few items which we can learn from to improve our projects in the future.
Great. I appreciate everyone. As noted, Mark and I will be tag teaming this presentation. And since Mark has already done 50 presentations between Winter Workshop and the Utility Summit, you'll get to see more of my smiling face on this one. I also realize at this point that you're realizing this is two traffic guys about to tell you how to do your job. And in some respects, you're right. But hopefully, the purpose of this workshop or this session is to talk about missed opportunities. And, it's not my intention to call out people. It's not my intention to lay blame. This session is really about the opportunities that we missed, and hindsight being 2020. Our hope is that as we look at projects and as we do projects moving forward, we'll learn from it and maybe take a look or a different perspective to do things differently. I'm going to basically say again, this is not a blame session, so check your egos at the door. It's also not the intention to call out anyone. So again, if there's a picture of a project you worked on, my hope is you take the discussion as viewing it from a different perspective.
I'll just add as Don gets started that I want to echo a little bit of what Buckaloo said yesterday. I think everybody's trying to do the right thing. Our projects are tough to deliver. There's a lot of rules, regulations that we need to follow. So there's often conflicting, between schedule and budget and doing, getting the right thing done. It's always difficult. So again, just want to reiterate a little bit about what Buckaloo said yesterday and tack on to what Don was saying there, that it's not meant to be a blame game here.
Yeah. As always, we start every presentation with our mission statement: excellence in transportation, every trip, every mode, every dollar, every one. We're really going to focus on three areas: project scoping, project design, and then again, some things that we're seeing in construction. Our first project really is addressing project scoping. This was a project in the city of Wilmington where you can see at the bottom of the screen, freshly constructed sidewalk, freshly constructed curb, except that for whatever reason, the scope of the project did not go up to the intersection. And as you can see to the right of the screen, we have a curb ramp, but yet we left this one corner without. This is just a different perspective of it. You can see the brand new sidewalk to the right, the brand new sidewalk to the left, and nothing here in this curb ramp. And why this is important is because, again, we had an opportunity to provide a great connected path. You'll see the playground for the school in the background over here. Again, just an opportunity that for whatever reason, we missed. And, Mark and I didn't go seek out the project folks for this one. There may be a reason we're not aware of, but again, it just seems like when we were there, we had the opportunity to make this better. This is actually just the plans. And again, the LOC actually did go through the intersection, but the limit of work actually stopped short. This is an example again of scoping. This actually happens in land development, and it's the mismatch of land development activities and timing of projects. The curb ramp to the left was installed as part of a commercial entrance some years ago. What that did not require at the time was either an extension of it to the property line or even a right-of-way or easement for it to be built at a future time. The sidewalk that you can see just above it is the new sidewalk that was constructed via the most recent project. And as you can see, we've got a gap. And unfortunately, at this point, it will involve probably right away and adding it to a project to try to get that built. And I think that, the question is, well, why is this important? Well, it was identified as part of our PAR as missing connectivity in this corridor. It's also one of our high pedestrian corridors and also a high pedestrian fatality corridor. This being 273 in the Route 13 area. And again, as we look at projects, not just capital, but also in the land development, there are opportunities for us to really be looking ahead at what are going to be the needs, not just for this project, but how do we connect the projects that may come along behind it.
And for this one, at this point, I'm going to talk to Jeff Nisgoda and Abe down in planning. They have an open-end PAR project they're really doing great work with that. Them and the folks in construction in cranking out small sidewalk type projects like this. So I'm hoping that it can get this added to that. Now, doing it now, it's obviously it's years later and more expensive, mobilization, et cetera. So, but hopefully we can get this addressed.
Again, project scoping, this is along Route 72. It was the effort to go back and I guess replace an existing multi-use path that really runs from Newark to south of Old Baltimore Pike. And you'll see here is, the limit of work stopped just shy of a failed concrete piece of sidewalk. We understand there may be an underlying drainage issue here. And I think the question begs, as part of scoping, should we have coordinated with maintenance to perhaps either add the work to the project, coordinate with maintenance to do the work ahead of time, in which case then we come in and fix this. And in this instance, I understand that the concrete slab has been replaced. I just don't know whether the underlying drainage issue has been solved. And so you can see, again, this is just the construction plan that stopped short of that one piece of concrete. And I know we did receive a complaint from a citizen about this once the construction was completed. And the obvious question is, well, why didn't you fix the broken sidewalk? And I think there is, again, an underlying reason because of the drainage. But again, I think we should have maybe stepped back and said, well, what can we do to fix the underlying issue as well as then that piece of sidewalk? This is, again, a connectivity and scoping matter. This is Route 4. We had a project here several years ago as part of an HSIP site and rebuilt the traffic signal, installed all new pedestrian crosswalks, head signals, totally upgraded that. We then had a follow-on pave and rehab project that came down Route 4. And we did, I think, create a connectivity piece PAR route on the south side of Maryland Avenue. But on the north side of this, we came in and reconstructed the 2 curb ramps on the corner of this church property, except that what got left was a piece in between that does not connect now to the intersection and the pedestrian signals. So here's just an aerial. Again, you can see curb ramp, brand new piece of sidewalk and curb ramp, which leads you to a piece of sidewalk that is not accessible. And again, we're about 150 feet short. Understand it would have involved reconstructing the apron, probably having to do some grading work into the church, but to come along the front of this and connect into the signal, again, just a missed opportunity at the time. I do understand we have a project now that is going to do some work at Boxwood Road, and I think it's going to be added to that scope of work. Mark, is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, again, you can just another perspective of the same project, so close, but yet so far. Another scoping concern, again, here's a project where we had the project that came in and reconstructed Willow Street. The LOC stopped actually within the existing curb ramps that were there that are not compliant, but the plans did not include the reconstruction of those curb ramps. Again, it should have. These projects are required to add new compliant or replace existing non-compliant curb ramps where an existing prepared surface intended for pedestrian use crosses a path. So I think initially the solution was to eliminate what was going to be the proposed crosswalk. I may have gone one slide too far. And then consider having folks come down to the next intersection. In reality, that's not the desired path for folks. They're going to want to stay up here and cross at the most convenient place. Again, just a thing, when we're scoping, sometimes it's inconvenient, but we really do need to reconstruct those ramps. We see it in existing signage as well. A lot of our signs are old. A lot have been installed over the years, and we have the opportunity as part of projects to enhance them. One, to bring them into compliance with new conditions in the manual, but also to update the hardware, renew the surfaces so that they're retroreflective, the colors are right, and to get the right size signs, as signs have increased in size over the years. So here's an example of a sign that was left. We did a project up in Wilmington. Here's the limit of construction of paving, but we left this sign in place. That really leads, it's a warning sign for the intersection. It's the wrong shape, it's the wrong size. Again, it was an opportunity just to go ahead and correct the deficiency. Again, a stop sign. Again, we had an opportunity to upgrade that. The sign to the right, and while I'm partial to yellow and blue, and I'll also now give my shameless plug to the University of Delaware men's basketball team. It's on the verge of getting an NCAA tournament berth tonight, 8 o'clock on CBS Sportsnet. You all need to watch. This is clearly not a compliant sign in color, at all. And again, it was left in place. We had an opportunity as part of the project and really should have upgraded the sign while we were there. Again, a yield sign just outside the LOC, not really on a standard post, and again, left leaning, and again, old, degraded. Again, it was an opportunity to do some upgrades.
And I'll chime in that certainly signs can be a challenge once we get into construction, because unlike most of the road system, signs can change pretty quickly. So through design, the designer may have done the right thing and had everything spelled out properly. And then, at near the end of the design or beginning of construction, whether it was a DelDOT project or say in this case, it would have been City of Wilmington, signs can change. So when you get to the end of a capital project, there's some challenges there that you need to think about. That again, signs can change a lot more quickly than most of the road system.
Again, this is a case and something that really, we're entering into new territory. This was not a motorized facility at all, intended for bikes and peds, and yet the privacy fence here, created a slight obstruction issue for bicyclists as they approach this intersection. And, much like we would consider sight triangles for motorized traffic, we need to be considering the sight triangles for non-motorized traffic as well. And again, I think here a stop sign should have been proposed in the design. It since was, and I think has since been installed as well. But just again, one of those considerations as designers, as we kind of embark in new territory and different types of projects. This is just an example of where we came in and did some work, replaced the curb ramp, replaced the curb. And you'll note that in the original, this area of crosshatching, we actually eliminated a section of curb when we put it back in with the curb ramp. And what we've created now is a sump area. And you can see here the pavement's degraded and now water is actually laying here. And so as designers, we need to be thinking as well, if we're removing it, where's that water going to go or not go? And in this case, I think the property owners are now complaining that the water is coming onto their property as opposed to catching the curb line and draining away. Again, I don't know the reason why we didn't install the same length when we were doing the design, but now that's a concern for not just the department, but also for the residents that will have to mitigate. Vertical clearance and sign obstructions. So, these are projects where we actually did replace the signs. But as you can tell, when we get into the spring and summer, and once those bushes to the left have leaves on them, we're not going to be able to see them. And likewise, the sign to the right is obstructed as well. One of the things that we need to be watching out for, particularly as designers, is if we do not have clearing and grubbing in the project, we need to be including notes to address the vegetation clearance. And whether that's something you make incidental to 201, is a potential option. But again, something that we as designers and we in construction also need to be cognizant of when we see these things happening. Hopefully construction is given the tool by which to address it. But again, as designers, we need to be cognizant of it. And again, here's the language: prune trees to achieve a vertical clearance of 10 feet and 2 feet adjacent to the sidewalk. And again, our basic site triangle for signing. Here's an example, and Mark will probably have some commentary on this one. We went ahead and had a project, and we were going to go ahead and install new curb ramps around the corner of the intersection. However, for whatever reason, the plans did not call for the removal of the existing depressed curb. And I think Mark and I were having a conversation about this morning. Mark, I'll let you chime in.
Yeah. So again, this goes back to, I think everybody's trying to do the right thing. And I know, and honestly, I've lost track of, what's the shall and the should in either in the PROAG or the pass manual, but was pulling the crosswalk and the curb ramps around the corner the right thing to do on this one? Should we have just left them where they were? I know it's not desirable to have the curb ramps on the radii, but that's where the pedestrian desire line is. And honestly, that's probably where people are going to cross regardless, especially, somebody who's not in a wheelchair, they're going to cross there. And also that's where the driver's making the right turn coming towards us in that picture. They're going to have the best sight line of somebody who's crossing as opposed to around the corner. So I don't know if there's again, if the right thing was to move it around the corner or if we should have just left it there. Now, once the decision was made to move it around the corner, the location that, Don was showing there, that should have been removed.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we've had a couple projects come through here since that we still have not removed it. So again, as we're scoping projects and as we're designing projects, we need to be on the lookout for these types of things that are remnants from past projects. Again, this is a location where if you're coming down that sidewalk, you may then come down that depressed curb into an area that we're saying we don't want you by virtue of having moved the crosswalk around the corner. Having had George's discussion about FOIA, I'll reserve some commentary on this one, but here's a corridor that we went ahead and did an improvement project on, created a PAR accessible route, but there are areas on this project that we did replace guardrail, and yet we left these sections of guardrail in place. And so again, we just need to be consistent in our improvements. This will be complicated to fix, but again, we have guardrail items. We did install guardrail in other locations as part of this project. It was an opportunity to also then correct this deficiency. We're also seeing in some instances now, guardrail that's being installed basically butted up to sidewalk. Our standard requires a 7-inch offset so that the post can actually rotate. Again, something to be cognizant in our design. And certainly from the construction side of the world, if you're seeing this in plans or seeing this being constructed, we need to be raising the flag to get it addressed. I think in this instance, we had enough width that we could have potentially saw cut the sidewalk and removed it. I think since traffic actually did evaluate crash history here and made a determination to let this be in place. But again, as designers, particularly as we're doing more sidewalks and more paths, we need to be aware of that requirement for that offset. And here's the detail. And unfortunately, I don't have a good picture of the replaced in kind guardrail, but there are times where we, as designers and in scoping, we just say, well, we'll just replace this in kind. And unfortunately, this tree is in that offset distance. We require a 3-foot minimum from the back of post. Clearly, that tree is not offset. I think we have to have that discussion of what can we do. Well, if it's in our right of way and we can adjust the location of the guardrail, we may need to actually consider tree removal in this instance. This guardrail is actually protecting, I think, a bridge, which is just off into the distance. But on private property, it gets a little more complicated as well. But that may be a tree that the property owners planted that they want to remain. But again, we need to be careful when we just specify replacing kind. And make sure that the details that we're giving to the folks in construction really can be applied. We have the same obligations as if we were physically designing it as we would by just using that term in plans. No presentation would be complete without discussing some common ADA deficiencies that we're seeing. And I know, Mark spent some time yesterday talking about some of the challenges they have. And so I'm not necessarily going to focus on that as much as we know the items that are going to get identified in an ADA inspection. And so, if we're seeing these items, we need to be addressing them before we're getting to an ADA inspection, not waiting for the ADA inspection to happen. Offsets, the vertical distances here, both raised where the pavement is lower than the ramps, and where the ramps are lower than the pavement. Again, these are items that are being identified in a bunch of inspections. Again, we know the condition prior to setting up the ADA inspection. We know it's going to get called out. We should go ahead and just move to get it fixed beforehand. Again, some vertical offsets. In the picture in the right is something that we're seeing more of. This is actually the joint material, expansion joint material is actually sticking up about an inch above the surface. Again, something that's visible, something that can be corrected, that doesn't need to show up on an ADA inspection report. Again, we can get it addressed prior to the ADA inspection. Back to vertical clearances. Again, calling out, this was actually a PAR project, and unfortunately, it did not have clearing and grubbing. So again, just as we're designing projects, we need to be cognizant of this issue, and we need to make allowances. We need to give construction the tool, whether that's notes or whether that's a pay item, to go ahead and get this clearance work done. I got to take a shot at traffic or else you all would be mad. So, traffic isn't harmless here either. We've installed apparently some PED signals behind some vegetation and installed a PED signal behind a utility pole. Again, as designers, we need to be paying attention to these things. It may look good on a two-dimensional plan, but really, we need to be taking those visits to the field and really assessing what is the condition going to be that if I'm installing this at or around the utility pole, am I going to be able to see that PED signal? Some other issues we're seeing with signs are the colors and the improper installation. And then more recently, as we've used more tubular markers, we're seeing some concerns there. I hope I don't have to say what's wrong in these pictures. But as part of the design, if we want specific colors of signs, particularly fluorescent yellow signs, we need to make sure that's clear. We need to make sure that the signs match. I just hope I don't have to say anything more than that.
I mean, nobody's going to misunderstand these signs. This is not a major safety concern. it just makes us look bad. It's sloppy. And so let's not be sloppy.
Sign post installation. For the love of country, we need to get this right. I have heard a number of descriptions. Well, they were at 4 inches and then the topsoil subsided, or we had some settlement. 2 issues on this. One is the picture to the right. If we had 8 inches of additional settlement, we have a bigger issue at hand. And I think we'd have to really evaluate what we're doing. But in reality, this is something that if they get installed and we're not present, that we can go out and look at, ahead of a final inspection and get these addressed prior to a final inspection. I swear every month this issue comes up. We need to do a better job at this. And again, addressing it prior to a final inspection so it doesn't show up on an inspection is really what we're asking. And you'll ask, why is this important? This is why it's important. The sign stubs require proper embedment to perform properly. If they're up too high, it could create a snagging hazard to the vehicle that might strike them, or it could potentially even pull out and yield. And I've been with traffic in different capacities since 2000. This is the first time, however, that I've been aware of an issue that we've had with a signpost, but this was last August. A signpost actually came up through and impaled an individual who was in that passenger seat. And so, again, that's why it's important. It's a safety feature. And again, if we do not have the proper embedment, or if we have too much sticking up, it can create a hazard. Channelizing devices. This is just as simple as the color of the reflective strip just needs to match the color of the line that it's supporting. So if the line is yellow, the strip should be yellow. If the line is white, the reflective material should be white. And with that,
on that last one, I think nobody, if you're on like a triangular island where you have yellow and white separating, nobody's going to beat you up over which one you pick, like on a corner. But this one was obvious; it should be yellow.
So I do know we have one question in queue. The question is, who makes the final decision on project creep, and at what point do you add or not add one more thing? And I think those are valid discussions to have at scoping. Again, I go back to the first project where you have a curb ramp on one corner, a school on the opposing side, and yet we didn't take the opportunity to add a curb ramp there. To me, I think that just makes sense. The project where we talked about the potential drainage issue, I think that is a situation that you could open up the ground and be in for a significant effort. But again, I think we could have coordinated that perhaps a little bit better, maybe worked with maintenance to get that work done ahead of our project. But when the citizen complained, we really didn't have a good answer as to why we did have that piece of concrete fixed. And if we had done that work and we knew the maintenance project was going to come six weeks or a month after we finished our effort, I think that's a better story than we don't know why it didn't get fixed.
I mean, ultimately, it's the designer's decision, but they're obviously getting input both during scoping and through the entire plan review process from, all the different support sections in construction and ADA. There's obviously some requirements in ADA where it's required. It's not just the designer's decision. And, I think, the list of things that we're going through here, it's probably vastly smaller than it would have been, 10 or 15, 20 years ago, or, back in the day. Don could tell you the horror story of how the sidewalks were value engineered out of a project. And now it's on our list to add sidewalks back to that project. So we don't do that anymore, particularly related to, some of the pedestrian and bicycle topics. We're obviously continuing to evolve.
Yeah.
I think on the design side, like I was saying at the beginning, there's there's a ton of different challenges to get a project to PS&E, and then there's a ton of different challenges to get it from PS&E to complete. But, you know, early on, I think there's generally a good mindset to try to accept as many of those comments and suggestions and to go the extra piece of sidewalk or to, you know, extend your scope a little bit to address an existing drainage concern or whatever. But, you know, kind of as noted in the, you know, at some point you got to stop. You can't let your scope creep forever. And eventually you have budget and schedule issues that you need to, you know, say pencils down and we got to get this out the door. So I am, you know, this presentation is kind of inherently, you know, looking at things where we think we could have maybe done things a little bit differently, but really every day that we get anything done, it's impressive. The number of hoops and that we have to jump through and rules and regulations and federal, state, political, public, it's getting anything done in our industry is impressive. And I give kudos to everybody. And hopefully we can look at some of this today and, you know, maybe just take some of this and do some things, you know, a little bit better here or there to continue continuous improvement in the spirit of continuous improvement.
And with that, Mark has successfully used up all the rest of our time. So we don't have time for any more questions.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Don.
All right.
Our next presenter is Steve Sisson, Design Resource Engineer from Project Development North. He will focus on various design items which have been seen on plan reviews and some recommendations for improving the quality of our designs.
Good morning. So I threw together a few items to talk about today. Hopefully it will help you in making mostly curb and grade selections for your projects. And then I'm going to be a kinder, more gentler Clayton and point out a few things that I've seen in the field that we could have done better with. So as an icebreaker, when I first came to DelDOT, there was a massive pond out by what is now the new parking lot, and I had named it Lake Johnny because my brother used to be the facilities manager here, and I had joked around with Secretary Cohen about that, and she wanted to know why it couldn't be Lake Jenny, and I tried to explain to her that you only name the unwanted body of water after the engineer created it. So and then when Steve Wright, I actually had a picture of what it used to look like, and I couldn't find it. So Steve Wright oversaw the drainage on the new parking lot, and this picture is kind of unfair because I took it when it was raining hard, and he put a curb opening in and gotten rid of most of it. So well done, Steve. Oh, of course, I forgot to advance my picture there, or it's not advancing. So all that said, that was the picture I was trying to show you. I'm looking at my screen with a live presentation of my notes, and then trying to run this one. So you guys can all have a chuckle on that. So things to consider when you're selecting your curb. Obviously, the big things that we typically start with is the design speed, or Mark like to say now posted speed. And to me, hydraulics and the next would be kind of available right away. What type of curb you're going to select, how much room you have. So these are the 5 types of curbs we really should be using. You know, it's either 1.8, 1.4, 3.8, 3.4, or the type 2. Type 2s for medians and pork chop islands. Small commercial entrances that are standalone with no curb around them for target value. Obviously, the type 1 is our most efficient hydraulically. So I mean, I personally like to see that everywhere. It's better when you come back to mill and pave. You don't have to do any handwork around it. You can just go straight down the curb line. You know, the 3.8 and 3.4, we have limited right of way. You got to get a bike lane in next to it. You don't want the bike having to deal with the large gutter pan. That's probably the correct location. I got some pictures of that to show in the future. Obviously, there's references to curb and where to use it in the RDM. And that language is older. We used to use the word mountable and vertical, or barrier, I should say, and now the correct words are sloping and vertical. Multiple documents, we have the Green Book, the RDG, the RDM, they all say something a little bit different, which causes some confusion. It's not very helpful. We really need to have clear guidance for the department on what we're going to use and where. It's an interesting comment down here about on the Green Book. Oop, went too far, about using 6-inch curb on high-speed roadways, but they call it sloping curb. But if you look at the picture that's relevant to ours, it's not sloping, it's rounded, but it doesn't quite match our 3.6. Our 3.6 is closer to, or I think I used this, our 6-inch is closer to what's used in the bumper study that was shown in the roadside design training. I have some slides of that coming up so you can see a full comparison. And this is from the bumper study. And really items of note here are that the 6-inch curb, the vertical 6-inch curb actually acts worse than the 8-inch curb on low speeds and shallow angles. The launching is higher and further, where the 8-inch actually will redirect the curb at low speeds, and even to somewhat a higher speed. If you look at the table F10, these are things to consider. The 6-inch curb isn't really that helpful to us, and it's less helpful hydraulically because you don't get to use a hooded inlet. So this is the comparison page, and you can see that our curb doesn't match completely either one. I guess it's something we should consider, is creating a 6-inch curb that matches what's in the Green Book now, and then trying to come up with a hooded inlet so it's more efficiently hydraulically. But the reverse side of that is, the 8-inch curb does provide some redirective capacity and provides pedestrians with some security. So obviously one of the items is cost when you're considering curbs, and we did the spreadsheet, and unfortunately the math is wrong on the averages for the 6 inches. There's really almost no difference in what we see in the bid prices for the two curbs, and it costs more down the road if you're considering your 8-inch curb or 2-foot gutter pan in the shoulder width. If you got a 8-foot shoulder instead of a 10-foot shoulder, because you're counting that too, you're actually saving paving in the future. So I don't really see the benefit of using the type 3 in those conditions. And here's an example of the bike lane of the old road design manual would show. The new guidance from AASHTO or bike guide is that they want that 4 feet. They don't want the shy area to be inside that sloping curb. So she would want to use the type 3 curb and gutter. So another 24. Oh man, it jumped a lot. Key got stuck. So anyway, this is an old picture. It's nothing recent, so nobody needs to run out and check this. Just remember, if you see something like this, you need to call John Garcia, regardless of county. This is just a design note. And one of the problems with the type 3 curb is that our grates don't fit in. The type 1 grate doesn't go in any of the hydraulic software. There's no chart for it other than a flume study done by Nina, which I think they did in a parking lot with a case of beer. If you do use the toolbox or one of those other software, you have to you have to fudge that cross slope to account for the fact that whatever your paving slope is not going to match the gutter slope. So you can't just put in 7%. And you have to fudge the width here. You have to make it 2 feet because it has to match, or 1.7 feet has to match whatever the grade is. So just something to be mindful of. I wanted to include this slide so people don't always understand what the type 2 looks like in the field and a curb line. I mean, I think the original intent of that recess was to get it out of get the grade out of the wheel path and striping. In this case, you probably could have put it almost flush, just can't leave it so the flange of the concrete lets the water go behind it. But that's something to talk about. The detail committee maybe come up with a secondary detail for this where you can flush mount them and have them still work. Again, so this is the thing you need to be mindful of when you're choosing the 3/8 curb. It allows you to have that hooded inlet. Hooded inlet makes it more efficient, more resilient, helps with debris handling. And then there's just a diagram of the type E. And then for the road design manual, if you're not using the 3/8 curb with the hooded inlet, you have to apply a clogging factor when it's against the curb line, and then another one without the curb. So a lot of times, particularly in sumps, this gets overlooked. You can't just, in the sump, you could double up the inlet, but not on a longitudinal slope. The water will just go right around the second inlet. So grade selection, excuse me. With grade selection, we always, hydraulics, bike safe, debris handling, which we really don't talk about much, and then pedestrians. So there's our standard type 1 grade. You can use that against the curb lines. It's good on slopes 2% or less. It's not great with debris handling. The deepest part of the flow is where that smallest opening is. I'm a geek. I drive around and look at these in real life conditions, and you always see there's something piled up there. So you're losing some of that spread. The type 2, we use in medians and swales and anywhere bikes aren't allowed. So like I-95, you could use this on 95. It's the most efficient grade. It self cleans. The type 3 we use where bikes could hit it in any direction. The type 4 we use on slopes greater than 2% against the curb line, but not in sumps because it doesn't have enough open area under orifice conditions. And then the type 7 is a last resort where you have a potential for PEDs to cross. Last resort, please. And this is just the descriptions again, but the thing you really want to consider is that the type 2 has 51% open area. When you do your orifice calculations, that's very important, which is why you want to use it in swales, particularly sumps. So it's more efficient and handles debris better that way. Here's a chart. So something you need to be mindful of, that 45-degree incline bar is not the type 1 grade. The type 1 grade is not here. Rule of thumb, when you're using the software, you just put in rectangle grade for the longitudinal slope, and then for the orifice flow, you actually put in the opening from the previous opening area from the previous slide. And then note that the vein grade, once you hit 2%, becomes more efficient. So that's why we want to use it, particularly on steeper slopes. This is proper use of a type 3 grade on the left, improper use on the right. That's just going to fill up with debris and trash and clog up and not work very well. Again, this is the top pictures, proper use of a type 1 grade. The one here in the bottom, the bike could technically ride the wrong way through that. You don't want to use it there. It should be a type 3. Couple more pictures where we could have used type 2s. And again, these are perfect locations for type 2. You're in a swale. It's going to be super efficient, not collect as much debris. You want to use those there. I pulled this slide up to show you the difference, what the actual tilt bar grate, the 45 tilt bar grate looks like. It's not, does not look like our type 1. This is a study done by the Argonne Laboratory CFD study, and the reason I wanted to show it was it shows the effects of clogging on the capture and how the flow goes around the inlet, which is why if you put grates side by side on the slope, it's really not going to do anything. We did it out on Westover connector, and just I try to drive by there when it's pouring rain so I can see if that second inlet's catching anything. That never is. Side by side, you can see the vein grate, how that frontal opening is much bigger, and with the type 1, it's little tiny openings in the deepest part of the flow make it really prone to clogging. But at 2%, no clogging, they all capture more, less than 2%, they all capture about the same if it's not clogged. Just debris handling. Again, I think these guys are out in the parking lot with case if you're doing this. It makes no sense that the P50, which the parallel bar grade are type 2, is for. I don't know, but the rest of it looks correct. The curved vein grade, they use simulated leaves for this, not beer cans or bottles or other debris. But the vein grade acts well in places where you're going to have a lot of leaves. It's fine. It's not going to clog up, at least according to that study, and it's better on slopes. So this is one example of what happens with that type 1 grade. That first few holes fill up and then debris piles in behind it. I took these pictures 3 weeks ago. I mean, it's well past fall. There's still tons of stuff out there blowing around, and they clog right up. So this goes back to the slide that Mark showed yesterday with the PC full of water. Something we really need to do, at least for new construction, is try to drop inlets in above the ramp, so we're not having spread during the rain event into the ramp, so that people could walk through without getting their feet wet. Never drain the roadway over a shared use path. It will collect sediment eventually, and they get smaller. In case of maintenance, I think this is an extreme example. It's just down the street from my house, but they used it basically as a swale, and now it's buried. I dropped my car at Firestone and walked back to the office the other day, and these are the things I found in my way. This is at the signal on the other side of Firestone. Obviously, I mean, I don't know if it's the drainage here is a puddle or it's just that much sediment drops out because of the configuration of the pork chop island, but we really need to try not to run water through the pork chop islands because it'll collect the debris like this. New construction, you want to try to drop some inlets in and avoid it. Obviously, when anybody's walked over next door has seen this fence. I mean, this is just to need work out some kind of deal with the property owner and fix this. Steve said he'd look into it. The non-ADA compliant grade, it's not even oriented right. This is right up front, which having come from subdivision or spent time in subdivision, there's nothing more than developers like to do than is rubber nose and something we did wrong. And thankfully they don't use the north entrance anymore, so maybe nobody will see this. And the last note, just on monuments, concrete monuments at PCs and PTs, and pins at jogs. That's pretty simple. It's not written anywhere. This came out of a design meeting a few years ago. Hopefully we'll get into the new road design manual or into whatever supplement we have for it. That's all I have. Oh, that's not all I have. The one thing, and yes, the Philly special. And that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. We don't have any active questions right now. So with that, that brings us to our break. Our break is scheduled to go to 10:45, so it's a little bit longer than we had originally scheduled. So let's just plan back to get back then at 10:45 and stretch your legs, get some coffee, and get refueled for the second half of today. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everybody. Before we get started again, just one more reminder, the evaluation form should be sent out after the last presenter today, and that'll be due on Friday if you'd like a PDH certificate. So at this time, Brad Sabarillo, Group 3 Construction, will be presenting on the inspector pre-inspection checklist he worked on to create and prepare for a project for, prepare a project for initial inspection. Sorry, Brad, I'm getting tongue twisted here. It's been a long day already.
Okay, thanks, John. So as John mentioned, I was asked to give a short presentation on a pre-inspection checklist that we've developed for Group 3 construction. We've been using this for almost 2 years now, just to guide our inspectors to prepare projects prior to requesting an initial inspection. So what we've heard, over the past couple of days, anyone who's attended the winter workshop for several years and now the lessons learned workshop, we've heard about the top 10 list, and it's also referred to as the repeat offenders. It's those deficiencies that are showing up on almost every inspection time after time. And as Don Weber mentioned in his presentation, it's also a topic of discussion at the monthly inspection meetings, and definitely spurs a lot of interesting conversations. So the question is always asked, how do we address these items? How do we stop them from showing up inspection after inspection after inspection? So in Group 3, I've always been a fan of checklists, especially for those processes that are not seen that often. And a lot of our project staff, it's several months, if not years, go by before they see project closeout. So we developed a checklist to help guide them in just preparing those projects for when they're ready to request a initial inspection. Okay. Okay, I lost my presentation. Okay. So hopefully you heard everything that I said so far, and it looked like it jumped back to muting, but I'll continue. This is the pre-inspection checklist that we've been using, and I know it might be a little hard to read. I just wanted to give you an overall view of the form, and I will zoom in on the items as we move forward in future slides. But the goal was to keep it simple. We wanted to address the top 10 items that we keep hearing so much about. And when presented with a form that's 3 or 4 pages long, we wanted to encourage the inspectors to want to fill it out. So we did want to keep it to 1 page. And it would encourage them to perform just a full site review of the project. And as they're doing that, if they identify other items beyond what's listed on these forms, that they can still address them, because that's what we want the inspectors to do, is essentially develop an unofficial punch list. They can work with the contractor while they're still on site. They still have the resources there, and they're doing other work where we can address those items and get everything cleaned up the best possible before we make that request for an initial inspection. This form, it is a requirement that we want, that we're using in Group 3. And the way we're enforcing it is that the area engineers will not schedule an initial inspection until this form is received. And as you see at the bottom, we do ask the inspector to sign it and date it. And this is not meant for accountability. We're not going to hold the inspector accountable to say, well, you signed off on this and this actually wasn't done. We want this to promote them taking ownership of the project. We want them to, just review the site and put it in the best possible condition when they're presenting it for an initial inspection. We do understand that things may develop, by the time between the time that it's signed and the actual inspection is occurring. The overall goal is that we just want to reduce the punch list that we're seeing for initial and primary inspections. And just by going through this, we can address it while they're on site and, get it in the best condition when everybody's out there to do the initial inspection. So I'm not quite sure what's happening, John. Every time I try to advance a
Yeah.
slide, it mutes me and doesn't
Yeah,
advance. So I apologize.
we'll control it on our end if you just tell us when you want to advance. I don't know why it's muting you. Yeah.
Okay. I'm starting to take it personal. If you could advance the slide. Okay, so just to zoom in on the particular items, we did break it down by section. We tried to capture most of the major items on every project. And again, it wasn't meant to be a full list. We were just trying to focus on those top 10s or those repeat offenders that we're seeing on so many of the punch lists. And like I said, using this form for the inspector to do a full site review, it'll encourage them to potentially find other items that they can also add to that list and work with the contractor to address. So not to read through all of them, but you can see we broke it down by pavement. A big one we always see is that butt joints aren't sealed. There's the infamous breakaway sign sleeves that we're seeing and we hear so much about. And also some stabilization and grading. We have a lot of washouts that we always have to address, and the erosion control blankets never keyed in. So just focusing on those top 10 and getting them to look at those and address it and work with the contractor. So on a side note, another piece that we're trying to address is the habit of the contractor always wanting to push the corrective work until after the primary inspection. And it's a little understandable because in past years, we would present them with a punch list, the contractor would do the work, they think they were done, and then they get another punch list. And then they think they were done, and now that we've added the ADA inspection to our sequence of inspections, they get another punch list. So they've gotten in this habit of just saying, give me one list at the very end, we'll address it all and we'll be done. But we want to change that mindset because that's only extending the project completion and just not accomplishing what we want of reducing these items on the punch list. So we want to flip that mindset. And by using this form, we'll have the inspector working with the contractor to, again, address the issues while they're still on site, where they have their resources there, they're still performing other work and trying to get that done now. You can flip it, John. Just moving on to the next couple sections, we have pipes and drainage inlet and PCC curb. Again, we have just a few items under pipes, but if you happen to be looking at it to just see if the drainage holes are parged, if you happen to see, joint separations or anything like that, add it to the list. We just want that, as I said, an unofficial punch list that we're providing to the contractor, where we're just working and getting everything in a very presentable, best condition, so that when we have the initial inspection, we have a lot of these inspections that last a couple days. So we just want to be able to come out, take a look at it, make it an efficient use of our time, and minimize that punch list and just move on with contract closeout. You can advance it now. And the last two items we have, sidewalk and guardrail. As you may notice, we didn't include a lot of the ADA items on here, as we've heard that ADA is a very sensitive subject right now and a lot of moving parts. So it's being addressed in other ways. So we just want to kind of keep it separate from this form as we start to reduce hopefully the top 10 list and seeing those recurring issues and things kind of settle down with ADA, that maybe we'll modify the form and add it to it later. And again, at the bottom, you see that's where we have the inspector sign off and date the form. And again, this is just strictly so that the inspector takes ownership of the project. You know, a lot of our guys do great work, and we want to have them take pride in the project. And when they present it for initial inspection, that you know, it's a great looking project and minimize those punch list items. That's the overall goal. And like I said, we've been using this form for almost 2 years now. And we have seen a significant reduction in deficiencies on our punch list. And what we want is when engineering support comes out to do their primary inspections, that they leave with you know, a list with 0 items. And it is possible. We've had a few in this past year where we've walked away and we've had nothing to address. So, you know, we just want to keep up that good work and move forward with that way. So just to wrap up, we use this form mainly in group 3. I did share it with group 1 and group 2 to get their feedback on it and see if it's potentially something that they would like to adopt. Because my vision is I'd like to eventually make an electronic version of this form and add it to Unifier and work it through that process where the inspector can fill it out, sign off on it, and we can make it, you know, a step that has to be completed before that request for the initial inspection goes out. Because that's our goal. We've heard it a lot yesterday that the closeout of these contracts take a long time, and they really shouldn't. And any efforts we can do to shorten that, you know, shorten up the punch list items and address these repeat offenders, you know, that should be our goal. And this, hopefully with this form, we've seen it in group 3 working well, and just, you know, continue those efforts, because, you know, we just want to clean up these projects, get them off our books. We got a lot of work coming. So with that, that's all I have. So I'm not sure if there were any questions, but it's kind of short and
no,
sweet.
Yeah, none at this time, Brad. You answered my question about, is it prime for Unifier? It seems like the form was set up in a way that would be a good tool in Unifier if there's agreement across the board. So,
Yes.
All right. So our next presentation, we have a duo again, Mike Howsky, DelDOT Canal District Maintenance Engineer, and Jonathan Karam, Project Manager in DelDOT's Bridge Design section, will share with us some pipe repair methods from a maintenance perspective and the lessons learned that they've observed. Mike, we can't hear you.
Can't see me, I can't hear me. Can you hear us?
I hear you now.
Okay, all right, excellent. All right, where's the presentation? All right. So that went off great. My name is Mike Howsky. I'm the Canal District Maintenance Engineer. Presenting with me is going to be John Karen, Project Manager for Bridge Design. We're doing a presentation on pipeliners from a maintenance perspective. So let me change that. Too far. All right, just quickly, DelDOT's motto: excellence of transportation, every trip, every mode, every dollar, everyone. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to be doing a presentation on mainly maintenance pipes, which is our considered pipes less than 60 inches. And John will be covering bridge size pipes, which for the most part are pipes greater than 60 inches. So generally, if we are presented with a pipe that needs to be repaired, we have 4 menu items that we would decide from, which is cured in place pipe, CIPP for short, joint repairs, spray lining, or full replacement. We won't be discussing floor replacement in this presentation, but it's still something we have to use as a barometer to determine, what repair method we're going to use. So this is a quick slide just kind of showing the stages of a pipe failure, but ultimately they lead to this next photo, which I'm sure if you're in North District, this is acceptable, but in Canal District, we want to make sure we get this repaired. So also one quick apology to Chuck Ferguson. I'm sure he had PTSD looking at this location. Ironically, we actually did open cut this location, but if we could turn back time, we definitely consider lining it. But so the first option I'm going to quickly run through is joint repair. This is the least expensive method that we would decide on when we're presented with an issue. It's injection / hand grouting. It's something we consider a short-term, a pipe life extender, looking at 5-10 years. Ultimately, we're just trying to, you're not going to get the full service life, but if it gets that location off the books and gets the next one, that's something that is still ideal for us. So it generally runs between $400 and $600 per joint, 400, depending on the size. Obviously, the advantages are that it avoids invasive excavation, and I mentioned before, it's spot repair. And because you have to go in with a man or a machine, which is shown on the right here, if you have accession loss or something along those lines, that's definitely a limitation. So there is a quick video. This one I believe is not narrated, just outlining the grout repair process. That's what we consider a grout truck. And then you would have the next photo once it shows up. We call it packer. So you would video down, find where the leak is, and then you would send the machine in. It's going to inject a 2-part grout, and that's going to completely seal off the pipe, prevent any solids getting in there, so you avoid having sinkholes. Once that's all works, this is the first section, or the first part of the grout, and then the second will be here in just a second. And then you're going to pull it away after it sets into the balloon deflates, and you're going to video it, make sure that there's no other infiltration, and then you're off to the next one. So this is just a quick view of what it looks like after the fact. You can see it completely covers the joint so that no solids can get in there. The next repair method we decided, or we could choose, would be the point repair. It's essentially a small section of cured in place pipe. Again, we consider it short term. I know that the literature is going to say longer term, but we consider it a short term repair. It's also limited by crushed or work pipe. It's just going to adhere to what's existing. So if you have pretty significant warping, you might be losing some hydraulic capacity, and this isn't going to really do anything with that. So it generally runs between 650 to 725 per linear foot, depending on the size. There's a 3-foot minimum on that, so you're looking at a couple grand for each repair, which compares pretty nicely to what we would use as a extra open cut repair method for a spot repair. Like this would be something called dig and wrap, but obviously you don't have to bring crew in if you have access issues or something along those lines. It's just something you would decide to use. And as mentioned before, we do consider it a spot repair, and there's some limitations to it as well. So the next one's a video, I believe, and it should be, this one should be narrated. Let's see if it works. It does.
As sanitary sewer and storm drainage lines age, they deteriorate, crack, and fail. This can cause leaks, root intrusion, and soil infiltration, leading to blockages, backups, and increased water treatment costs. Point repair solutions from Hammerhead Trenchless are a cost-effective, environmentally friendly method to structurally repair sections of any pipe, ranging from 3 to 60 inches in diameter, and can be easily installed even in active I&I conditions. To ensure successful installations, Hammerhead has eliminated the guesswork and waste by pre-measuring and assembling each point repair solution. Before installation, the pipe is cleared of debris and prepared for installation. A camera is used to locate the section of pipe to be repaired. The pre-measured resin components are combined and thoroughly mixed. The resin is applied to both sides of the fiberglass mat. The mat is folded and then rolled around a packer, overlapping itself. The mat is secured using zip or wire ties. The packer is attached to push rods and air hose and inserted into the pipe. The packer is inflated, the ties released, and the fiberglass mat is pressed against the inner surface of the pipe. Once the resin has cured, the packer is deflated and removed, leaving a fully structural repair that will last 50 years or more. Hammerhead also offers E80 and H20 load-rated repairs that meet or exceed rail and DOT standards. Conveniently pre-measured materials, quick cure times, and long shelf life. Sewer and drainage experts trust point repair solutions from Hammerhead Trenchless.
And this is just an after view of what it looks like when it's all said and done. You said the left-hand picture there, a pretty significant offset joint, and on the right there, you have the after the point repairs installed. So now we're going to move into more what we consider the long-term solution or long-term repairs. The first being, at least from a maintenance perspective, this is the one we generally like to do the most, and that's the CIPP cure in place pipe. The reason for that is we consider this more of a precast solution compared to cementitious, which is obviously mixing the material on site. So there's a lot less risk for us in the CIPP solution. And another reason is obviously with a lot of the pipes that we're dealing with, they're a lot smaller, 24 inches below in neighborhoods, pools or whatever's above them. So we're losing less of the hydraulic capacity by installing a CIPP liner, which is, quarter-inch thick, something along those lines, compared to maybe 2 or 3 inches for cementitious lining. But like I said before, if it still has kind of the same limitation of point repair, it's just going to adhere to the existing surface. So if you have a lot of warped or crushed or something along those lines, it's just not a good application. So. Sorry, it's a little delay there. Too far. So it generally runs at least $150 to $250 per linear foot. Now that is just for pipes that are about 24 inches or less, 150 on the smaller side, up to 12 inches and then on up. And as I kind of mentioned before, it's more cost effective for us and for smaller pipe. As you start getting to larger pipe, the resin becomes too expensive, and then that's when you would switch over to a cementitious line. But that where that line is can vary depending on the location and the length. So it's generally somewhere around 36 or above though. Okay, so this is just a quick 10,000 feet view of what the process is, and obviously you would start with clean inspecting it, then you're going to bring the material from what they call a wet out facility in an actual refrigerator truck so that the resin can't activate. Then you would basically blow it in and you would cure it. There's actually a video on the next slide that'll go into more detail than that, but this is just one of our last projects we did, and just kind of give you a quick view of what the end product looks like. I'll show you a video in the next one, shows one of the process. If I can get it to pull up. Should narrate too, but I'm not hearing it.
As pipes age, root intrusion, infiltration, and exfiltration cause cracking, breaking, and backups. Repairing or replacing these old pipes with the conventional open cut method is costly, time-consuming, and intrusive. Cured in place pipe rehabilitation by Hammerhead provides a cost-effective, no-dig, durable, and impervious pipe with improved flow, with no interference with existing infrastructure. Cured in place pipe is compatible with nearly all pipe materials, such as clay, cast, PVC, and concrete. CIPP can rehabilitate bends of up to 90 degrees, either horizontally or vertically. A custom cut-to-length resin-impregnated liner is wound into an inversion drum. Compressed air inverts the liner, resin side out, into the hose pipe through the drum's nozzle until it reaches the opposite end. The liner is cured to the existing pipe using hot water, steam, or ambient air, activating the resin's hardener and forcing the lining smoothly and firmly against the host pipe throughout the cure. Once hardened, the pipe can be placed back into service for at least another 50 years with no root intrusions or backups. Cured in-place pipe rehabilitation by Hammerhead, a proven, long-lasting, trenchless repair method for renewing aging and deteriorated pipes. Equipment, expertise, and support. Rehab and replacement pros trust Hammerhead Trenchless.
Okay, and that just went. Four. Okay, I think that was everything, but only one wants to watch it twice. Okay. Next, the last thing that we would consider is some cementitious lining. John's gonna get more into that from a bridge perspective. Obviously, there are some overlap between us as we get, you know, larger than 36 inches to 54, you know, it becomes, CIP just doesn't become economically viable at that point. So we might have to, depending on the location, decide to do this. But for us, there's a lot more risk that's involved. You know, you're going to be investing a fair amount of money on it. So we just want to make sure that, and absolutely, this lessons learned should help, you know, going forward with where the pitfalls can be with it. But for us, you got to make sure that you're prepared to give this the proper amount of attention that it needs, depending on how much you're going to be spending. So it generally runs, what we're seeing in our contracts is between $350 a linear foot, and that's for pipe sizes 40 inches or below, to $550 per linear foot, and that's for pipe sizes 48 and to basically up to around 60 inches. And as I mentioned before, it's more cost effective for larger diameter pipes. You're obviously losing less of the hydraulic capacity, and but there are some risks that are involved. You just got to make sure you keep that in mind when you make a decision on what you're going to go forward with. Continue by. All right. So this is just a quick overview of the process. You know, you're going to clean and inspect the pipe, and as you can see in the bottom left-hand picture there, we have some pretty severe corrosion on the flow line. So you're going to have to repair that with an epoxy grout, and then you're going to install gauge screws on regular intervals along the peaks of the corrugations to make sure you get that full thickness over the entire pipe. And then you know, finally, you're going to install the material, usually via spray. I think with that, I'm going to be handing it over to John as soon as it moves. Here's part of this.
Same spot you were at. All right, thank you, Mike. So I'm going to cover the pipe repair methods from a bridge perspective. So we do have CIPP. This isn't really often used. You know, we have pipe arches that would require a custom size CIPP, so would be quite expensive. And as Mike had mentioned, this is mainly for, you know, 40 inches or below. You know, then it's much more cost effective from that standpoint. It has no closure to the roadway or much impact to the public from that standpoint. You know, we have full replacement, which is usually the preferred method. Full closure is required. It's usually the highest cost, largest impact to the public. However, you do get to increase the hydraulic opening, which helps if you do need that additional hydraulic. So we also have the spray applied pipe lining, which I'll be covering mainly, and this can be used on any size pipe. We recently had 3 projects that we recently lined that I'll go into, and there's no closure of the roadway or impact to the public. It's pretty cost effective, and it does decrease the hydraulic opening, but you do gain lower Manning's value, which kind of a trade-off there. And usually the lining is only 2 or 3 inches, so it's not you know, too invasive there. So we have the pipe liner bundle. This recently was completed. So we had our consultant Panoni that did the design under Bryce Baker, who's project manager from Bridge. JJID was awarded the contract. with ETickets as the subcontractor doing the lining, and we used the geospray material, which is a geopolymer pipelining material. And we actually began construction in January of this year, and it was completed in February. This was under Raj Group, and they did a great job managing the contract and making sure this was all taken care of prior to the time of year restriction that we had. So one of the bridges, one location was Bridge 1-406 on Brick Mill Road. This is in Middletown, Delaware. It has an ADT of slightly over 5,000. And there were 3 CMPs, 14 foot 3 inches by 8 foot 11 inches. And we had a 2.8 inch liner thickness. So the reason we used the liner here was because we had utility impacts, both aerial and underground. You know, just from that savings alone, I believe the entire 3 locations was around 2.2 million. And I think we would have spent that 2.2 million here alone if we were to do a full replacement. So this led to minimal traffic impacts. You know, they never had to stop traffic. Whereas, you know, full replacement would have required a lengthy road closure and detour for the public. So here are a couple before photos. As you can see, there's a lot of rust below the water line. It wasn't in great shape. You can, you know, put the hammer through it. And this is what we got at the end. So this is kind of what we're looking for. Looks, you know, really great from my perspective, and, you know, bridge management inspected it. Didn't really have too many issues with what we've, you know, what the final product was. And the next location was Bridge 1-242 on Red Mill Road. As most of you know, Red Mill Road is pretty highly contested. You know, there's a lot of influence there. So, you know, we don't want to close that road. And you can see it's over 23,000 cars per day. And these were 2 very large CMPs, 16 foot 8 by 9 foot 11. So some of the largest pipes that I would say are in our inventory. And it was lined with a 3.2 inch liner thickness. Likewise here, the high ADT, utility impacts, you know, we had a lot of cost savings from that alone, and it would have been probably more than the 2.2 million as well. So here's some before photos. This was an aluminum pipe. As you can see in the photo on the right, it's starting to corrode from the top. Once you see these white specks, then, you know, you kind of worrying about it and need to start to get this on the radar. So this is the after product. As you can see, it looks very similar to Brick Mill, you know, full continuous liner, no, you know, minimal cracking, no infiltration, you know, very happy with how this turned out. And they gave it a nice brush finish to keep that Manning's value lower and, you know, work well with our hydraulics. The last location is Bridge 1-362 on Library Ave, also with a ADT over 30,000. And this was one pipe. It was, you know, 122 inches by 84 inches about. And this is near the University of Delaware, so you do have pedestrian traffic. You do have aerials and utility impacts there, you know, guardrail and everything that you'd end up getting into. The pipes also, you know, kind of, I believe that's like, you know, 5-6 feet of cover or more. So, I mean, you would have to excavate a little bit there as well. So with this, we had no impact to the pedestrian traffic, no impact to the traffic on top, you know, so, and we are doing a research project with the University of Delaware. So we did a load test prior to the lining, instrumenting the pipe with deflection gauges, stress strain gauges, and then we'll do the same thing once the pipe reaches the 28-day strength. We'll re-gear all the gauges, and then we'll do the same load test and kind of compare what we're getting with this. With these liners, it assumes there's no strength from the host pipe. So pretty much the pipelining should take care of the load entirely. So here is some before and afters, or some before photos here. This had a tar on it, like an asphalt tar that was put in here as maybe a rehab method. It wasn't performing great. So it was quite labor intensive to get all of this material off. We needed the pipe, 90% clean with the stuff below the corrugations, where the design thickness is from the top of the corrugation. So we want to have that entire 2 or 3 inches that we need above that corrugation, as well as the corrugations filled in. So it took maybe a week or 2 to get this cleaned. However, the lining only took them 1 day. They worked 2 shifts and they were able to line this pipe all in 1 day. As you can see, looks great. They did a good job with the flared end section. Likewise, no cracking, no real, no issues that we've seen so far. Overall, we're happy with this. So some lessons learned from bridge perspective and from even the maintenance side. For the design, the calculations must be PE stamped for the pipelining, so that would be done by the manufacturer. They would, or the sub-consultant, they would have their design calc stamped. Material specifications, these are really important. We need them to meet the flexural and compressive strength requirements. In this case, the flexural requirement, which is what is used for the design, was 1500 PSI that we needed to reach. Luckily, the lab came out, they did the testing. We followed all the procedures, and this was one of the first flexural tests that we've done. It's kind of new for our lab. They did a great job, and we were able to get flexural strengths that exceeded the 1500. So this material is very strong. Compressive strength was, I believe, 11,000, 12,000. Also, very good number. So just a couple other things with the work plan. It must be approved prior to the lining. So they have to have kind of like a pre-lining meeting and kind of tell us what their plan is, how they're going to do the gauge screws and stuff like that to measure the thickness, how they're going to clean it. So they have to prep it, clean it, make sure there's no infiltration coming through, because it won't really, the material might not stick as much. So they would need, hydraulic cement or something to plug that leak if there is one. Quality control, as I said, the lab testing, very important. So you got to meet all the requirements. Thickness indicators. So they put in gauge screws in the pipe at, I think 4 or 5 at different intervals. And then they ran a piano wire down the length of the pipe. So when they were lining it, they got to that piano wire and they knew that they had, the 3 inches or whatever the design thickness was. Then they cut back the piano wire and do a finishing coat. Post inspection, so inspect the pipe, make sure you document any deficiencies, any cracks. We want to keep track of those if there is any. Also, we can do thickness spot checks. So if there are areas that are looking a little lower, where we're not sure if that's the design thickness was reached, we can core it, or you could just measure the inside diameter and compare it to the host pipe. So I'll let Mike take over from here. He has a couple of case studies he wants to go through.
So we just threw a bunch of information at you, so I figured everyone go ahead and put on your maintenance cap, and you guys are gonna make a decision on a couple of pipes, a real world situation that GPI is designing for us for North District. So the first pipe is a 36-inch CMP. It's 160 linear feet. Obviously has some moderate flow line corrosion with some severe corrosion, some severe areas of corrosion. You can see in the pictures on top. There are some above ground obstructions, as you can see. It runs between 2 houses. You have landscaping, driveway, and also a generally small easement at 20 feet over 36-inch pipe. Second pipe is 36-inch CMP. It's 437 linear feet. It's got moderate flow line corrosion, some areas of severe corrosion, and a single area of severe distortion 40 feet from the left end over here, closer to Turkey Run. And there are numerous above ground obstructions. I've actually been out here, a very nice pool and some landscaping features. Surely not going to make any friends excavating that pipe up. So I don't know if this would be a poll question, but okay. The best option repair one is CIPP. It's about 65K. Cementitious about 80K. Open cut roughly 73, or a combination of open cut and line roughly 68. And then CIPP for this one, for option 2, 200, I thought these were questions, poll questions, 200K, cementitious 260K, open cut 150, and combination open cut 220. Okay. I guess the other one didn't make it as, the answers were, I guess it didn't make it as poll questions. The answer to the first one was, we're actually gonna open cut that one. You get a better product, and the severe areas distortion will impact the hydraulic capacity. And the answer to the second one is actually a combination. You want to get that, you're able to get that first area of severe distortion now pretty easily without too much of an impact, and then you can line through. And with that, that's all I got.
Hey, Mike, we do have one question for you real quick. It reads, where you have joint separation, can the CIPP solution re-shear if the underlying conditions that cause the separation aren't addressed?
That's an excellent question. I would say, yeah, if you, it is structural, I guess. So yes, it would, it's supposed to be structural. So I guess technically, yeah, you could, without solving the underlying issues, that would, I mean, you have some like undercutting issues along those lines, it'd be a little different, but yes, it's supposed to be independent of the pipe. So I guess the answer would be, it would be fine to use that method. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right, that's all the questions we had. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mike. Moving on to the next presentation. It'll focus on erosion and sediment control for our active construction projects. Nate Zimmerman, DelDOT ENS Control Program Manager, will provide some lessons learned from our recent visit by a federal agency.
Okay, so I think normally some of the presenters might have a little bit of an issue, like what am I going to talk about this year? But I can tell you it was absolutely a piece of cake for me. We had a visit from the EPA. So I will tell you, this was a totally surprise inspection. We did not do anything to earn this inspection other than being a delegated agency. There were no calls, complaints, no big to do. It was just they spin their, who are we going to terrorize this quarter wheel? And our name just so happened to pop up along with the Sussex Conservation District. So I said this was a surprise inspection, but to bring a little humility to the scenario, I went ahead and gave you the signs that they were coming. So, quite often terrible things are preceded by some signs. Sometimes it's locusts, sometimes it's cicadas. And I would urge you to look at the BroodX emergence map and see that it is identical to the Region 3 EPA jurisdictional map. I will also say that for whatever reason, these cicadas were highly attracted to high-vis clothing and vests and constantly landed on us. This also all happened in the middle of a pandemic, so there is that. And then, of course, the rivers and streets ran red with sediment. That didn't really happen. That wasn't Delaware, so nobody get alarmed about that. But just imagine if it did. I think we do a better job and we can help prevent that stuff. So finally, in May of 2021, the EPA compliance inspectors emerged from the dark hotel rooms, much like the cicadas that preceded them, and descended upon DelDOT's active construction sites. The following is a review of some of the things they found, not by any means the entire list. And then it's a list of some of the things that we can do to perhaps make correction and some corrections that we've already made since their visit. So what did we learn? And you see it says based on EPA early findings. The fact is, we don't know the entirety of what they're going to see as violations and what they won't. So we were given preliminary discovery from them. They did their inspections, talked about it with us that day, and then followed up with written correspondence about what they perceived as violations. We were given a chance to rebut, and now they still owe us their final discoveries. And as to when that could possibly happen, I have no idea. This is now the fourth EPA interaction I've had while working with different delegated agencies and for DNREC. And the timeline varies so much. I have seen it take up to 1.5 years before. So we're still waiting to find out. But one thing that's clear is they were not here for simple verification that we were generally in compliance. Quite often on a job site, I'll have either a contractor or somebody else say, hey, look, nothing's leaving, so what's really the big deal? That's what we call general compliance. But they performed an in-depth audit of site conditions, site documentation, and internal enforcement measures. Any deviation from the approved plan and stormwater plan or permit conditions was perceived as a potential violation. And even if site conditions were compliant, in other words, no sediment leaving the site, so generally compliant, any difference in site documentation was perceived as a potential violation. I'm going to go into a little bit more and describe what I mean by those terms there. So here's a few specific examples. A stabilized entrance had been removed with ESL approval. Its usefulness had been phased out due to site work progressing and site access in that area no longer being needed. So it's a totally common practice on a construction site. We either don't need that practice due to the way the contractor decided to build out the site, or we just don't need it anymore due to it being phased out. Well, the fact is that entrance was still shown on the approved plan, had not been redlined for removal. So it hadn't been documented for removal, and the EPA inspectors found this to be a potential violation. No vehicles were entering or leaving the site from this area, but that didn't matter. All that mattered is it was on the plan, but it was not there in the field, and it was a violation. EPA inspectors saw that a concrete washout area was noted on the plan, but no concrete washout area was present at the time of the inspection. Concrete work does not take place during an entire site build out. So it's periodic. And if there's no concrete work, you wouldn't think you're going to need the concrete washout sitting there collecting rainwater at that time. In this case, contractor had been using a small portable disposable washout system. So this is something they can set up and take down when they need it. The EPA inspectors did not want to see it, even though we had it in a storage trailer on the site. They just looked at the plan sheet, said it's not here. It's supposed to be there. Again, violation. Contractor taken upon himself to install additional erosion and sediment control measures, in this case, compost filter log. So in this photograph, you can see there's a line of reinforced silt fence, and there's a line of compost filter log, that's the green log in front of it. The plan only called for the reinforced silt fence in this area. And whether it was from undermining, high flows, concentrated flows, an additional log was added by the contractor to just shore up the area and prevent sediment from reaching that wetland that you can see right on the other side of that BMP. But the plan did not reflect that additional control had been installed. So this was also viewed as a violation. Notice it said even good deeds can go punished. The way that our current guidance, I don't want to jump on the bandwagon with the EPA 100% on this and immediately punish people who put forth a little extra effort to get an extra control in. After all, the intent of all of these BMPs is to protect the environment from sediment as a source of pollution. So if a contractor does install something extra, they have a week before the CCR. They will note it on their report, but it's not considered a violation or unsatisfactory until after a week. And the hope is in that week's time, the ESL will be notified and a red line revision can be performed and to make that extra BMP compliant in that case. All right, this one sent ripples that are still present. And so the EPA noticed staging stockpile area adjacent to the DelDOT project, but outside of the approved LOC. Many ENS violations were found within this area. The thing about this is this location was being used by the contractor through an agreement with the private landowner, totally outside of our LOC. Permitting and approval for this area should have been the responsibility of the private landowner in this case. So whether this was next to the site or a mile down the road, it was on private property. And we had nothing to do with that agreement or them using that property with that private landowner's consent. So the EPA noted the unpermitted area and all associated noncompliances on our DelDOT inspection report as if they were our noncompliances. They also noted that CCR inspections had not covered this area and cited that lack of weekly inspections could also be a violation. So it didn't matter to them the way we perceived it because it was outside of our LOC and that we didn't have control where that contractor decided to stockpile or stage in this case. And all of those things were tacked right onto our violation list. Right. Only on one of the projects that they visited did this come up as an issue on preliminary findings. But my fear is when they sit down and really go through everything, they might find it's very easy to tack these on for our other ones. They reviewed every CCR inspection report and listed every instance of noncompliance remaining uncorrected for longer than 7 days. For those of you that aren't aware, all CCR inspections occur on a weekly basis. Self-inspections occur on a weekly basis. And the reason is there is a standard that any noncompliance noted has to be corrected within 7 days. That's the reason all those inspections are formatted on a weekly basis. And every single time we go over that 7-day period, we put ourselves at risk of receiving a violation from either the EPA or DNREC. So we didn't really have any rebuttal for this. Certainly there are some site conditions that may prevent that. We do have some things in place with our SWIP track system where the contractor or construction can make notes and say, you know, the site was covered in snow, no access, things like that, that maybe could help us if the EPA looked again. But overall, they really don't care about site conditions, and there is a very stern expectation that things will be corrected within a week. All right, the other thing, NOI posting requirement. So every site they visited, they checked for this NOI posting. DelDOT regulatory inspections include verifications. So we do in-house, either Zach Messick or myself will go out and do a regulatory inspection and we verify that these are on site. You think about it, this is a sign that has to be placed in where the public can view it. It is a very easy check for a regulatory agency like EPA or DNREC to drive by and say, I don't see their sign, they're in violation, and pursue action. Like I said, extremely easily. So keep in mind, that's not the only site documentation that's required though. Also required or a copy of the stamped sign approved plan, copy of the NOI, and copies of your weekly inspections. Those are also things that Zach and I will ask for while doing our regulatory inspections. Now, every one of these EPA inspections and often DNREC inspections are done totally by surprise. So we follow suit with our regulatory in-house inspections, and they are done by surprise. We don't give any notice. We want it to carry over just like if it would if it were another regulatory agency. So I will mention that the vast amount of information that the EPA and DNREC wanted from us during this audit, they didn't just want to look at the site, they wanted to look at every bit of paperwork we had, every CCR inspection, any internal enforcement they wanted to know. And we really couldn't have done that without help from construction, our CCRs, our ESLs. It was really cool to see these different sections of DelDOT come together, no finger pointing, and all work towards the same goal of getting the EPA off our back and out of there. So how can we improve? Now, I mentioned some of the things we've already done. So any contracts bid under 2016 contract specifications, DelDOT is the lone NOI holder. That's the notice of intent or federal permit. What that means is that if we get in trouble because of the contractor's bad actions on our projects, we have sole responsibility and take, accept all responsibility, all fines, everything come right on us. Now, there are some things that we can do in-house. We can do stop payments or withholding a draw. We can do stop work order. Every one of those things has consequences and pushback. And so we have to be careful when we use them. But under 2020 contract specifications, it requires that the contractor be a co-permittee and accept partial responsibility for stormwater noncompliances. This means we are 50-50. They're on the hook just as much as we are. So we can have a very robust inspection program and tell them what's wrong. And now they are responsible if they don't fix it, should we be audited by the EPA. In order for this system to work, that last note there, documentation of internal enforcement measures is crucial for the system to be beneficial for DelDOT. What that means is that if payment is withheld due to an E&S issue, it needs to be documented. Now, I'm not saying all of these need to be sent to the E&S program for us to document. You can save them on Unifier, you can keep them, make a nice folder that says internal enforcement measures. So the other things that would be very useful to put in there are notes from on-site meetings. I know a lot of the internal enforcement is semi-informal. You're going to go out, you're going to have a toolbox talk out in the field and tell them to get their stuff together. But just making a note on a sheet in there will document time, date, who you talk to, and should we be audited or face fines via the EPA now, we will have that information to then hand over and say, here's everything we did to try to get our contractor in compliance. Maybe they can take the fine instead of us. For the offsite staging and stockpile areas, first thing we did was add notes to the pre-construction meeting form, and we directly asked them specifically about plans to utilize offsite areas. They can lie and say no, but we do at least record their answer. If it's yes, then we notify the proper delegated agency of the contractor's intentions and document this notification. So that earlier picture that I had was from Sussex Conservation District. That was down in Sussex County. We would simply email so that we can record our notification. Hey, this contractor plans to utilize this area. It's outside of our LOC. How would you like that handled? And depending on the desire of the delegated agency, DelDOT can provide permit coverage for some of these offsite locations. It might be that it is less than an acre and it shares a border with our job site, and that delegated agency does not care about that minimal standard permit application fee for the work they're going to have to do to approve that project. So they'll say, hey, DelDOT, just wrap that in your LOC and take care of it. But we're not quite, there is no black and white for this because every delegated agency is different in how they may want to handle this with us. What we do is that we have great communication with the ESL, ENS section, and the agency, and we make sure all these areas are permitted regardless of how it ends up happening. As far as the additional controls being removed, just communicate with the ESL regarding any deviations, no matter how small or insignificant the changes may seem. It may seem to you that the contractor put in extra silt fence because we were losing sediment in this area. That just might not ring a bell for something that needs to be documented. It was a good thing after all. But we need to know about those. The EPA made that very clear that that is a violation. And then BMP removal, even for those that have been obviously phased out, just make sure you get approval from the SL. Does not necessarily have to happen as a red line. Simple email can suffice as documentation that it's okay to remove controls. And I had to talk about dewatering again. So this is back from 2021. Because let's face it, if you're dewatering, you're encountering water, you're probably near water, and therefore there's a much higher chance for sediment to reach the water. With all the notes I made here, I think the most important thing, and this is particularly crucial on our bridge projects, the time to properly set up your dewatering is right off the bat. Once we have a work area isolated from the water and we're pumping around, or we have our sumps installed and we're keeping it dry and we have active work in that area, obviously there's going to be a lot of reluctance from the contractor to disassemble their pumping array, flood their work area possibly, and lose any work they've done. I don't think we really want that either. So the best thing that can happen is a pre-inspection prior to those pumps running. It's not really currently required 100%. You know, the CCR will go out and do an inspection before major earth disturbance. Sometimes those dewatering areas are not totally set up 100% and running. And even if they are, and they're found to be non-compliant, a lot of times the contractor is allowed to proceed. And then a week goes by, the CCR comes back, and there we are still with the non-compliance that's now probably going to hang out until pretty much the end of the project. And remember, anything over a week puts us out there. All right, with all of these things, communication is key. Common sense will not always prevail, but we can try. I can tell you with the EPA inspectors, they don't understand gray area whatsoever. That's not in their language. And I don't think they really know erosion and sediment control or sediment stormwater regulation enough to understand why some gray areas could exist. These inspectors were really good at reading plans, comparing that to site conditions. The how or why didn't really matter. It was a very black and white decision for them. And with that, let's see. Don't see any current questions.
No current questions at this time, Nate. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions, reach out to Nate Zimmerman, and he can get you straight. All right. So now I'd like to turn it over to Don Weber, who's going to issue some closing remarks and recognize some individuals for their efforts over the past year.
All right. I realize that I'm about all that separates everyone from lunch, so I will be brief in my remarks, but wanted to start by recognizing the many people it takes to plan and put on this event. I did not realize how much of an effort goes on behind the scenes until this recurring meeting announcement showed up in my calendar with my new position. But it is a year-round activity, both for the winter workshop and for the lessons learned. And so, you know, developing agendas, soliciting speakers, coercing speakers, and volunteering speakers, and then organizing and managing all of the logistics is a significant and time-consuming effort. The danger in listing the names that I'm going to is that I'm going to miss someone, and so I apologize in advance, but here we go. I wanted to thank Danny Macchioni, Bob Kovacs, John Cariano, Maureen Kelly for leading and sometimes carrying the rest of us through this effort. Likewise, Jansen, Burton, Eric Simo, Monroe Height, Mark Bucklew, Mike Gettings for the input and planning and coordination on the agenda items. Wanted to also extend my thanks to the presenters for this year's workshop. We're all busy, so it takes time to prepare and then present. It's much appreciated out of your normal busy schedules. I believe all the presentations were informative, and I hope, in keeping with the theme of the workshop, you've learned from the discussion, or at the very least, they've provoked you to think differently about your daily duties. A huge thank you goes out to Todd Rivas and his team for organizing and running the technology behind this virtual format. And finally, thank you to Sandy Wolf and the T2 Center for handling the registration, invitations, and evaluations. So do want to conclude this year's workshop by recognizing some of the positive efforts by a few individuals this past year in some of the areas that we've discussed over the past 2 days in design, construction management, and coordination. Individuals who were nominated for these categories this year all displayed a commitment, performance, and attention to detail. And as part of that, we want to acknowledge them not only with a certificate, but also a challenge coin. And the group has actually purchased gift cards, $25 gift cards for those winners in each of the categories. The individuals have been recognized for abilities in project design. They've been recognized for their design work coordination with other sections and the ability in meeting project deadlines. So for the best in design, the nominees were Percy McNeil, Bryce Baker, and Nicholas Rigolino from Project Development South. The 2022 Lessons Learned Designer Award goes to Nicholas Rigolino. Nick is a project engineer in PD South and is the lead designer on the SR1 minus Conaway grade separated intersection project. This project, which has a total cost of over $50 million, includes the reconstruction of SR1, new alignment to create 2 service roads along SR1, and the addition of 3 new roundabouts at the major intersections throughout the project. In addition to providing a new critical link for east-west movements in the 5 Points area, this project will also provide more opportunity for access to the very popular Lewis-Georgetown Trail. In addition to this project, Nick has also been a key contributor to PD South's success with open-ended construction projects, being the lead designer on several locations himself, as well as mentoring and guiding other designers in this section on their respective projects. Keep up the great work, Nick. Our next category will be for construction management. And thank you for hitting return. I lost my keyboard. These individuals are proactive with addressing problems as they arise on site. They continually demonstrate good communication skills and pay attention to the specs and details to ensure finished product is consistent with the department's requirements. They've demonstrated an ability to coordinate with other sections well, are diligent, consistently showing an eagerness to learn and show growth with each project that they are assigned to oversee. The nominees this year are Sarah Powell, George Pierce, Herb Monslund. The 2022 Lessons Learned Construction Management Award goes to Herb Monslund. There was a gap in the area engineer positions and being able to fill them with other promotions. Herb, who's actually not a PE, has filled a gaping hole by stepping into the area engineer role, not only on his I-95 and 141J Drive project, but also for stepping into the viaduct reconstruction CMCG contract. I can speak from my personal experience in working with Herb on both projects that he works hard, has vast contract knowledge, problem solves, and gets the job done, always with a positive attitude. Herb, many thanks and congratulations. The final category for the 2022 Lessons Learned Award is for overall project coordination. And I've termed this one as Wally's Road Warrior Award. The award goes to Jerry Najiski. There's a delay in the return. Hit return again. One more. There we go. Goes to Jerry Najiski. Anyone who's been involved in projects or needs to know anything at all about a project, you go to Jerry. He's your one-stop shop, whether it's a capital project, utility, or developer-based project. Over the last year, the department's leaned on Jerry and his ability to know about the multitude of projects, how these projects overlap, potential conflicts that are going to result, and then have him figure out how to get us out of this mess. His level of involvement and commitment working with design, construction, and the contractors on the viaduct project has also been noteworthy, given the high pressure and high demands. He's been leading efforts to coordinate U.S. Army Corps of Engineer bridge projects, which is something akin to herding cats, and has been leading efforts coordinating with emergency services statewide. Jerry's efforts have led to traffic operations moving him into a project coordinator role for full-time. Jerry, many thanks and congratulations on a job well done. In closing, again, I'd like to thank all the folks who work behind the scenes, the presenters that we've heard from the past 2 days, and for you for attending. A final reminder, evaluation forms need to be submitted by close of business on March 11th if you wish to receive PDHs. As part of that, I would ask that you also comment on future session topics or those topics that maybe got discussed today that you'd like to know more about. And with that, I want to thank you for all attending and have a great day.